everyone.
Okay, we do a roll call.
Nathan Jacobs is absent, Committee Hickey is absent, Mr. Straka,
Here.
Ms. Christie,
Here.
Mr. Rodelius,
Present.
Mr. Leonard,
Here.
Mr. DiDomini,
Here.
Mr. Zupnik,
Present.
Mr. Cavallini, Ms. Patras,
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here. In the open public meeting?
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News, and to all subscribers and posted in the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 11, 2019.
Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have our minutes from September 5th that we need to approve.
So moved. Second.
Who got it first? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone need to abstain? I think we're all here. Okay, minutes have passed. We have resolution for Nervine.
Do you want to do the minutes of September 12th? For September 12th?
September 12th, do we want to pass the minutes for now, or are we going to wait till next week? We don't vote on the transcript, do we?
No, you don't really vote on it, but
Haven't had a chance to read it.
No, haven't had.
yeah, you could wait till next week. I mean, you just got it today, right?
Yeah, we did.
So
Late in the day.
why don't we wait and you'll.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read it myself.
I mean, they will become the minutes, but because
Right, I
they're
understand
verbatim,
that. Right.
but let's.
So do you want us to vote on the minutes themselves?
No,
from 12? Let's
just
wait
wait
for the
on,
whole.
yeah, wait on it, we'll
Okay, that's-
incorporate the transcript after you've read it. and-
Okay, that's what I thought we would do. Okay,
Excuse me,
yes.
I wasn't here for September 12th, but I'm reading through the detailed stuff. Do I sign something that I?
Yes, you sign a certification that you read the transcript or listened to the tape, and
So we'll do that next week.
yeah, you can do it before, well, let's see, yeah, before the next week, Thursday night. Because
Before
it's-
the meeting.
yeah.
Before the meeting, and then you would be able to.
Then you're eligible to vote on them if it were to come to a vote.
Okay, so-
Madam Chairman, on the resolution, are you up to
Yeah.
the resolution?
yes, we have.
Okay, I did get an email from, I think it's from Anthony Scasaro's secretary and from the engineer. And so it did ask for some additions to the resolution, and I could read it to you. All it is asking really is to list at the bottom of page 3 two other variances that they did ask for and that they were granted. And I don't have any real problem with that. I asked them to do a red line and get it to us, but nobody, I guess they didn't see the request. So if you wanted to vote that resolution tonight, I'd read you these two other variances that are being included. If you wanted to wait, we could just put it in next
Either way,
Thursday.
whichever the board wants to.
They're so minor that maybe I'll just read it.
You want to read it? Okay, that's fine.
There's
This is on the Nervine
This is on
resolution?
there being
Okay.
resolution, so imagine item F would be added at the end of page 3, or, turning into page 4, to state these two other, F and G. It'll say, front yard setback, section 13-405.4, the minimum front yard setback for non-residential uses in the VN zone is 30 feet. The existing front setback is 14.74 feet, non-conforming, and with the expanded right-of-way will be reduced to 4.51 feet, period. 2, G, planted buffer to parking, section 13-405.5B, at least 20 feet adjacent to any street line shall not be used for parking and shall be planted and maintained with lawn or landscaping. So those are two variances that they did ask for, they did explain. If you remember, they have to widen the county road dedication, so that narrows that front yard down to that 4.51 feet. So with that addition, I'd recommend that someone move it and consider the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Strakoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Robilius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. DeGiovanni?
Aye.
Mr. Zepnik?
Aye.
Ms. Pattis?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall?
So I should wait for a new resolution,
Yes.
Tom? And I
Yes.
won't sign this one?
That's fine. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, I'll open it up to the public if there's anything anyone would like to talk about that's not on the agenda tonight. I'm seeing no one. We'll continue. I think we'll open it up to our application.
Madam Chair, if I could just pause
Oh,
on item
sure.
13 on the agenda.
Yes.
Actually, I gave Janine some improper information. I think Hamilton Farms is an application that just came in for an augmentation to their practice facility. Will be a planning board application. That's a pending application. I haven't reviewed it yet for completeness, but it's shown on under item 16, but it should actually be under item 13.
Okay, so it's going to be planning, not
Yes.
zoning. Okay, got it. Okay.
Good evening.
For the record, Tom Alman with Dave Pitney on behalf of the Primrose School. Recall we were here a month ago and offered some testimony about the proposal for a new daycare facility on Burnt Mills Road. We heard testimony from Ron Kennedy and from Matt Taylor. Mr. Kennedy is here again. There he is. Mr. Taylor could not make it. He wanted to be here, was in Boston, and his flight got canceled, so he couldn't join us tonight. He is available by phone if I have to get a hold of him, but he was hoping to be here, but he just couldn't make it. Recall, we concluded the case where there were some open questions the board had raised about landscaping and lighting and the so-called hot box in front of the building.
Yeah.
I'm going to recall Mr. Kennedy and talk about those issues. We also appeared again before the Historic Commission within the last couple of weeks. We'll talk to you about
I
that.
would like to hear about that.
So when Mr. Kennedy concludes his testimony, we have the architect here. Jim Cassay will testify. We have Betsy Dolan, our traffic consultant, will be here.
Okay.
And if we get through those witnesses, I'd recall Mr. Kennedy for the planning testimony at the end. So that's sort of my game plan for tonight.
Okay. I see we also have a letter from the county.
Yes.
Do we want to talk about that, Paul, about any of the issues on that?
Well, I think Mr. Kennedy can probably address that as part of his testimony.
Okay, fine. Okay.
So I'll recall Mr. Kennedy.
Okay.
We had marked, as I recall, 3 exhibits last time. Mr. Collins, A1 through 3. I think we have some more this evening. Ron, how many new ones do you have?
There's 5.
We had 5?
Yes.
What am I missing? Oh, yes, we had the, let's see that.
What's the number now?
I only had
5
8,
over there.
but I think we marked only 3 last time. I don't, you have actually have 5 marked? Okay. Then call it A6, please. Yeah. Just tell us what it is.
Good evening. So I do have an updated exhibit that I want to talk about, which is the site plan. The site plan rendering is dated October 3rd, 2019. And just by way of background, I'm going to go through just a couple of quick things that have been updated since our last meeting. The first item is that I attended the Historic Preservation Commission, the architect, talked to the folks there, and we primarily focused on the sign, but we started getting into the details of the building itself. And on the sign, by the time that I presented that, we had a sketch that the architect's going to talk about tonight. It shows the sign in conformance to your 8 square foot. So the physical sign it still has a pedestal that's smaller, brick like it was, but the actual sign as you measure it is down to 8 square foot. So we wouldn't ask for deviation on that. You're still asking for, I'll say that rosette on top of the gable that's over the side door. So that still would need really, because again, you're only on one sign, and that would be considered a sign too. One would face Burnt Mills Road, the other would be on the building, wouldn't face Burnt Mills Road. And again, it's just over the entrance itself.
So it's the same as we talked about this size, with size and one additional sign for that. But we went through that with them, they felt comfortable with that design and certainly reducing things conformance. The other thing they talked about was the details of the architecture in trying to get some more stone added to the base of the building. And they wanted some elements associated with that stone. So you'll hear from the architect tonight, someone who just want to say, that's my discussion, they weren't there. So I related that back to the architect. The other thing you asked for, based on the fact that we were coming here tonight, is what they would ask for is not to come back to them now for anything, but at the time before building permits, come back with some samples before building permits so they can see some of those samples. They asked for that the board asked for. So obviously we would agree to do that. And come back with samples of the materials, the brick and stone that's there. So obviously some brick and stone look good together, some don't. So I know the chairwoman of the Historic Preservation Committee really wanted to see that interplay. We didn't have samples, we wouldn't have that at this phase of the design process. And we go back with samples and show them. So I think we were, the applicant was amenable to that. Certainly as
The
a
design of
condition
the
for that.
building they were okay with,
Yeah.
and
It
the
was
size,
that
and the size of the
angles.
building?
Correct. And it was balanced. It was the details of the brick and stone and the sign that we spent most of the time for. So on the other aspect that we spoke about last meeting is we talked about landscaping in the front and as a way to, I'll say, narrow the viewscape to the property. So Exhibit A3, what we did was show more landscaping that's on either end along Burnt Mills Road, along the frontage. So on the east end and on the west end of Burnt Mills Road. And again, the notion here is the view to the edge of the building, which is only 55 foot wide.
Can you pull it back a little bit, Rob? I think Frank can't see it.
So the notion here is that we would just frame out on either sides of the property and just add more landscaping that's there, and a combination of deciduous trees, some evergreen trees, and some ornamentals, for lack of a better term, to close down that view. So you're not looking at the side and the bigger part of the building, you're really focusing on the court that's only 40 foot from the right-of-way of the 55-foot width across the front. You're trying to narrow that down.
And Ron, what exhibit is that?
That's the new exhibit I just put in A6.
A6, right. So that's revised landscaping from the prior.
Correct, and that's really it's along the frontage that we revised the landscaping. Again, add more elements at the corners along Burnt Mills Road to try to narrow the view, that you're not looking to the long axis of the building, you're really looking at the frontage.
Ron, on that one, can you identify where the sign is going to go?
Again, it's shown right here.
Can you see
on the
that?
plan, which is, I'll describe it, it's off the front corner of the building closest to the parking lot. If I extended that in the front, it would be right there. So it's near the driveway entrance. We don't want it too far right in front of the building.
Okay.
But it's near the driveway entrance, and it's about 15 foot from the driveway, towards Route 287.
And our hot box is in the right corner of the lot.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Because we've all been by the place you told us about up on Claremont and went, OMG.
Yeah, and it's big.
Before we move on from the sign, which way is the sign facing? Is it
So it's perpendicular to the road.
To the road?
Okay, and
Okay.
it's faced on both sides, like a typical sign would be. So it has a
And,
face on both
and
sides.
the emblem is going to be on both sides?
No emblem, that's been
Oh, I
removed.
thought you said that was going to
The
stay.
only emblem that we're talking about, in addition, the second sign, would be physically on the entrance to the
building.
building. The
So the other
architect will
one
show
can-
there's a gable end where all the kids as well as the teachers would go in. And it doesn't really fit, it doesn't face Burnt Mills Road at all. So we're asking for that relief on that sign, not visible from the road, not to advertise, but just more of defining the entrance.
It's really decorative.
It really is, and it's in a rosette feature that's there anyway. If so we can't have the sign, the feature would still be there, and it would look like a louver. And you'll see that, there's one in the front, that this louver with no sign in it. So it's just replacing that and putting their logo in that, and the architects will show you that. It's on the plans, but the architects will show you a rendering plan of that.
I have a couple more questions. How many feet off the street is the sign? Is it 15 feet or is it?
Well, the physical curb line will it's about 15 feet. I think it's 5 foot from the right of way, and there it's about 10 feet from the right of way to the actual physical curb line.
Okay.
You got a sidewalk in between?
Yeah.
That's in the right of way?
That's good. And, just, if you can just give us an approximate numbers, the space, I guess it's on the west side, the width of the building, and then the width of the parking lot.
All right, so the width along the frontage of the building, where I'm pointing to right now, is 55 foot wide.
Okay.
Okay? The width of the parking lot is a standard, I'll call it a double loaded, where it has an aisle and there's parking on each side. That's a standard dimension of 60 feet. Okay, so the driveway or from curb to curb in this aisle is a 60-foot width. 18-foot space, 24-foot aisle, 18-foot space. And then the width of the building that we try to narrow down towards the road is 55-foot wide.
Thank you.
Okay, hot box.
Yeah, so we talked to a couple of different elements, just to give the context to it. We talked to the architect about other facilities like this that they've done, not only in New Jersey, but the Northeast. And the size of the sprinkler system line that would come in here would be a 6-inch line. So we put that into the math of what the water company wants with this thing. It would be a big hot box that we talked about, like in Burnersville. So we looked at it, we talked to the water company, and we talked about other alternatives of trying to get it in the building, as we spoke about last time, and how we could do that. And just some definitions I want to go through again. Is the main thing that they want out of the ground, and they don't want in a fall, is actually the backflow preventer, where it dumps on the ground. That's what they don't want, that to siphon water, and if that fills up with water and fall, that contaminates the system. That's what they don't want. So the meters can actually go underground, but typically when you go above ground with this hot box, you put the meters in there as well. But we can split it. So we can actually put the meters in the ground, and we could put it in the building if it's less than an X number of distance from where the valve is, where it goes from public to private, and the physical backflow preventer itself. So with doing some reconfiguring in the building, we talked to architects and we talked to the applicant that was here last time, and we think we can fit it in the building. Okay, that part of it in the building. And then what would be buried underground would be likely the meter set would be in the ground, okay, near the right of way there. But that's typical of every job. We wouldn't get separate site plan approval for it. I don't even know where that's going to go yet.
Would you see it?
On the frontage.
Would it be visible?
It'll have a flush grate that would be there, that you'd open up a man door that you would open up that you can get down into that. But the meter would likely be in there, likely two, one for the domestic and one for the fire over there. But that's on a lot of jobs that are out there. And we don't get special approval. It's shown on the plan, and, you know, that's not something that's zoning setback or anything else that's there. So it appears under this condition, because the building is so close to the road, that they're going to allow us to do that. That was tentative. We talked to them on the phone, we didn't share plans, I don't have a letter back from them saying it's approved. And obviously, if they come back and say we have to have a hot box and it needs to be excised, the only thing I can say is we have to come back to you. Because there's no way I can give you enough terms of what that is today to make that determination.
So long story short,
Did you have an outside door to it then, for like a meter room type?
We don't know.
You don't know yet?
We're not sure if that's required or not. I just don't know. Likely, but again, it's up to how they come into that space if they even need to get in there. That's going to be a detail that we're going to have to work out with architecture and the work.
Well, an improvement.
Well, again, it's an unknown that we don't have before. We got a little clarity
Right.
at this juncture.
Right, and since this is a sprinkler system, does the fire department need to have access to it?
Again, we'll get access to anything. We got lots of tools. No, but it's typically not, I'll say this, Lou, it's not something that's a moving part that we would need during a fire operation
Okay.
to go into that one.
You don't have to turn valves on or off or that kind of
No,
thing?
no. I mean, that's not something, in putting my other hat on as a firefighter, that's not something you need to go into operate during an event that a fire was occurring there. that's not a component that's separate. We have things like fire department connections that are outside the building, that's where we put hoses going in to supplement it, those need to be accessible, plants in front of it, as signs you can find in the middle of the night, those types of things, but that valve, or any of that stuff now, that's not something that we use currently.
For the record, why don't you tell us why you have expertise in that area, just because the record doesn't know that?
A firefighter for 40 years in the past, chief, and still unfortunately jump on hard trucks.
Just for the fun of it.
We've heard the stories.
All right, so to close the loop on the hot box, we're not seeking approval for one.
No, and it appears that we don't need one.
All right, but if that changes, we'll come back to the board
Yeah,
and deal with
I don't
it.
have enough parameters to say this is exactly what it is.
Okay, thanks.
All right, two other minor things, is just the light fixtures itself. We went to a little view of Buckman Village. There's about 6 different types of light fixtures that are colonial. Okay, so I'm gonna say is I'll work out that with Paul, but again, will be a colonial fixture, that's fine, as opposed to the other types that's there. But there's a bunch of different ones. We were looking at what we did last with the Fresh Market application, and that's a little different than some of the other fixtures. And again, from my vantage point, you standardize it, and it's easy to make it work. And you know, what you want as the light fixture for Buckman Village, we can certainly make that work. So if Paul or Frank or wants to weigh in on that, but you know, we can, there's about 6 different ones we found out, and a few that all look similar.
Yeah.
We can make something work from them. And I think that's it.
You have the coverage issue too, Ron, just the turf.
Oh, the turf, yeah, we did talk about that last time. So in the turf, there's 4 areas that have outdoor play areas. And it represents about 12,000 square foot of area. And about 8,000 of that would be what I'll call artificial turf surfaces. And about 4,000 foot right around the actual piece of equipment themselves would have a wood chip or that 5R type of material around that. So it would be a hybrid of those things. And again, it goes back to your definition of what lot coverage, not impervious coverage, but what lot coverage is. If the artificial turf is carried in there with the wood chips, it would be up to a 72% lot coverage. If we got rid of the wood chips, because that wouldn't be considered impervious or lot coverage per your calculation, I'd have to configure that, but it would be down to 60 or high 50s, low 60%.
So we're,
Facilities relief, no matter what. I mean, it's still.
You went all wood chip and
The all
not,
wood chip, we wouldn't conform, but we would be at, if it was all wood.
was it 50.8%? This is from my notes
Well,
there.
52.7.
52.7.
We did all wood chip. And again, it could be done, that if the board felt that it's important, but that's just their model that they're working with today for that. And as long as I've been doing these, it seems like every few years, the type of things that they want to do for the surfaces are constantly evolving and changing.
Will any significant drainage impact by having this sort of material rather than wood chips?
In either case, no, we've taken that into account with the design of our drainage system.
Okay. I have no further questions of Mr. Kennedy.
I have one more question. Is there going to be somebody that will discuss those 2 different coverages? Why one would be better than the other for the children?
I'm not here tonight to talk about that, but I can say this from talking to him about it.
Okay.
Is the areas where they're landing was an impact.
Okay.
Okay, where they're jumping, sliding, that's right next to those is where the wood chips are. That's the intent of that. Okay, there's impact.
More cat.
Okay. The other areas that you'll see on this green color, the lighter green, as opposed to the brown, those areas is where they would not have that, and that's where the artificial turf would be. And a lot
Why
of it
use
is
one than the other?
that product disappears over time. Okay, it consolidates over time, needs to be replenished. And like any great 2, 3, 4-year-olds, stuff stays on the clothes, goes inside, goes in other places, moves around, gets thrown, eaten. So, all those elements there, that it's cleaner in those other areas to do it. This is not from a zoning, but from a functional standpoint.
That's what I was wondering.
It's separating those two aspects. Impact that meets in the safety zone around each one of these units, as opposed to environment, as far as ease of cleaning, maintaining, not getting things thrown, sending into the rooms. That's the distinction that needs to be expressed.
Is there a section here somewhere of that?
I have sections in the detail sheets. There's sections shown for how they would be built. Yeah, I can see which one. Look at the last 2 or 3 sheets.
And the turf is old-fashioned kind of AstroTurf or field turf with the,
The new stuff.
so the field turf's got that little ground-up tire stuff, right?
This wouldn't be that. This would be more of the Astro.
The old-fashioned AstroTurf.
Yeah. If you look on sheet 12 of 12, it's wood and rubber chip fall zone equal. Lower right.
So there's, reading that, there's the undisturbed soil, then you've got drainage components,
Yep.
and then you got this material that just goes on top of that?
Yeah, and it looks like that's 8-inch for wood and 6-inch for the rubber material.
And the rubber's like a matting?
It is, that's my understanding, it's like a matting. Now, what, I'm not sure, if some of those now have some type of glue or something that is pretty rigid, in the sense it's soft, but it's glued together. It's not like you can go pick that stuff up like you could on an AstroTurf field.
Right.
Okay, that it's a rigid type of thing. It's porous, but it's either poured or placed in place that you can't go disturb that and pick it up.
All right, I'm so totally confused about this coverage thing. Paul, straighten me out. If someone was putting a driveway in, and it was a gravel driveway, we would call it coverage,
Yeah.
right? Whether it was asphalt, stone, wood chips, whatever, we would call it coverage.
Correct.
In this case, they're putting this in, but they're saying 52% when it should be 72%. Is that?
That's
No,
correct.
well, 50,
Ask him.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
It's my opinion that all this is coverage. It's not all impervious coverage, but it's all coverage. And, the fact that it drains or whatever may be mitigating factors associated with relief from the variance. But I still think it's coverage. That generally, the way I describe it to people is that the coverage standard in this town is really a measurement of how much stuff you have on a lot. Whether it's
We make a distinction about it, impervious or pervious.
That's correct.
It's just lot coverage.
It's a very broad definition for lot coverage.
Good.
So perforated asphalt, again, it percolates, but it's
It's lot
coverage.
coverage.
It's not impervious coverage.
And are we? That's right. So there's gradations with respect to its
Permeability.
impermeability, okay. So which one of these materials is better in terms of the drainage?
Well, I think they're probably about the same. I don't think there's a significant difference between the two, but I'm looking at this detail, and I think that there's 2 options for what could be in that fall zone. It's either wood chips or rubber chips. This isn't a detail for the turf area around there. It's saying that this area in the fall zone could either be wood chips or it could be rubber chips.
Yeah, and Paul,
And those 2 products are equal in terms of their permeability.
The water will go right through either.
I think one's safe.
And they both consider the same coverage.
Those considered lot coverage,
Okay.
in my opinion.
And then the turf,
Wood chips are-
I'm sorry.
Wood chips are considered lot coverage. So if someone goes and mulches a bed, like a garden bed in their yard, that's technically lot coverage?
Well,
I'm just.
and I understand what you're saying, and the
The
distinction
coverage
that
police are coming after all of you.
What we're finding out is that we have a pretty high standard.
Well, the distinction I'm making here is, this isn't a mulched garden bed. This is an area underneath a play equipment in the middle of this recreation area. So it's really lot coverage. It's not like a planted landscape bed on the property.
Yeah, which we don't count towards coverage, right? We don't count the landscape.
Right, so the mulch on that landscape area is not counted as coverage.
Even though it's the same thing. It's the same
It's a
material.
little
The difference is probably that
The
you're
use.
actually,
If you want.
you're actually making
The
a
use
play-
is the, okay.
You're making a playscape that is a covered area. You're covering an area that is not, that could have been grass. And it's not.
And as far as
It will be
Bill's,
grass, but they don't want to do
So
that.
just plant a flower in the play area.
That would be a
For all
death
the
trap.
shape-loving
Would be a
plants
death
on the
trap.
there's some kind of material is necessary in these fall zones. I'm concerned about these other areas that just get the AstroTurf, right? These other areas just get AstroTurf, correct, Ron?
That's right.
That's still permeable material?
It is
Not the same degree or
probably more.
more permeable? Okay.
So-
All right, so in those areas, why can't they be grass?
They could, the whole thing could be grass, but it's not safe. That's what that's the discussion.
It's not as safe?
It's not as safe, okay, for them, because it's still, in those areas that artificial turf, there's cushions and zones in there, there's a mud component. If anyone who's ever raised a kid at that age, you know, you're gonna be dragging all that into a day like we have today. And guess what, on a day like we have today, you want those kids to be outside for a certain element. So that's the, you know, some of the reasons that you can do this. Now, we can make it all grass, but again, safety around the equipment, not as good. And the other areas, the outlying areas inside those fence, inside each play groups, you're gonna have conditions that are just not gonna be as good for those kids to go out to there in wintertime and, you know, a day like today, bringing back mud material inside the building.
And why is that not good?
What's that?
I think it's great for kids to get all muddy.
Somebody else has to.
I don't think we should justify.
How old are your kids then?
That's right. They may love it, I don't know if their parents love it.
Just saying.
Maybe the teachers.
On the design that's up there, I see that the back part is going to be, for lack of a better phrase, AstroTurf, right, all back there. What about
That
that?
one's it, that's the fourth room. So
That's
there's four outdoor
another
rooms.
play area up front.
Four.
And each one of those will be fenced in?
Separately, and again, they're separated because of the different age
Ages,
groups.
okay.
They don't want, you know, the 1-year-old, the 4-year-old.
Got it.
Gotta keep them separate. And there's different equipment even.
Yeah.
You know, as far as the difference between a 1-year-old piece of play equipment versus a 4-year-old.
Now, will there be grass in the front of the building?
Yeah.
That will be all grass?
All this around the perimeter, grass and grass. So the only area would be these 4 units there, and the perimeters would be grass, and then everything in the front would be. So as you drive by the road,
That's what
you're
I'm
gonna see all grass. You're not gonna see that space.
And the play areas are fenced in?
They are each, and separately, for, again, the distinction of separating the age groups.
So strictly, again, going back full circle, strictly, it's 72% lot.
Correct, and I'll just read the section of the ordinance that talks about that. Lot coverage goes on for a couple of lines, but the last thing it says is, lot coverage shall also include the areas covered by all decks, patios, and unfaced stone or other semi-pervious surfaces.
I'd just like to make a comment. I think if we're going to approve this project as a daycare center, then our priority has to be the safety of the children. That might outweigh some of our concerns about lot coverage. That's just my opinion.
So I have a really silly question, but I assume the AstroTurf you're proposing in those 4 play areas is green? Right, it's gonna look-
The environment.
But I, you know, like, it's plastic, you could make it purple, or, you know, whatever the primrose colors are.
That's good.
There could be logos in it, you know, like,
I think it has to be green.
It's grass.
it's gonna look like a field, it's gonna look like grass.
When the architect testifies, we'll talk about that, because they design a lot of these, okay? And you'll see it in other all the Primrose properties.
And I have seen another Primrose School, and it's great.
Yeah, so we'll talk, so it's not purple or orange or, I got it, West Virginia or.
The color rendering shows green, so we're gonna make sure it's green. It's required in our.
Could be Tennessee orange.
You know?
Ron, are you familiar with the Branchburg Primrose? I visited there the other day.
I haven't been to it, I
You
know
have
it,
not?
but I have not seen, I haven't been on the
Okay.
property.
All right, all right. I just wanted to see the similarities between that project and this project.
The architect may.
Making,
know some
okay,
of the differences
that's fine,
in that.
okay. All right. Any other questions from the board? Yes, Nick?
Yeah, the Somerset County Planning Board, on page, there was one of the items there I thought could be a major thing. On page 2, item 2 there, drainage structures are not permitted within access points for county standards. Sounds to me like you can't have drainage in the driveway or something like that.
Yeah, the biggest
And they're
thing, though,
suggesting moving the driveway.
And we're not proposing to do that, okay? So we just got this a couple of days ago, like we did. So we're gonna go back and forth and talk to them about that. That's a common comment on all their applications,
Oh, okay.
everywhere in
Oh, okay.
Somerset County.
Yeah, to me, it
Again,
looks
that's
like a
what we
big
can.
deal.
But we have to look at what the alternatives are and, moving the driveway,
Yeah, I know.
looking at the whole thing to them, just like with your group. And we'll get some settlement with them as far as how detailed would have to be for that. In other cases, we change the structure, we move some things around, we may have to make some adjustments to the physical pipe network that's there in order to
Okay.
make this work.
But you think it's not a big deal at this point?
I don't, I mean, again, I think that we can take a really rigid thing that says there's no way we can put this driveway here, to go and do it. The inlet that's there today is at the low point in the roadway.
Okay,
So I can't go move it 20 feet,
right.
but then there's gonna be a.
You can't move the low point, yeah, right.
When it rains.
Right,
So,
right.
that type of thing, but they haven't looked at that type of detail yet, that was just a comment in their checklist of things. So I need to talk to them, if it becomes if I have to move that thing 2 or 3 feet, the entrance, I can do that, and people have to look at it, be consistent. If I have to flip the whole building over and rotate the whole thing around.
Do a mirror image.
Yeah, I can't, like anything else, all these approvals are all conditioned upon each other.
Right.
So we can't get any of them until that point. I gotta talk to them and work through that aspect, but I wouldn't suggest to change anything on the plan with this board right now, based on that comment.
Anything else, Paul, that you might want to bring up about the county, or?
No, they're typical comments, and,
Right,
yeah,
okay,
I think they're all workable.
okay, that's what we want to hear. Okay, we'll open it up to the public. Anybody have anything? Haggerty?
Good evening, Brian Henry, 30 Drive, Evansville. I think I'm sworn in this hearing.
You're still under oath, Mr. Hagerty.
Yes, very good. Mr. Henry, if I could ask please to just do a little bit more clarification on the, I believe you said 55-foot width and the additional landscape buffers.
Okay?
So that's the 55-foot you described.
That's correct.
And the Historic Preservation Commission to address intensifying this buffer.
That's correct. Also,
And somewhat limited on the driveway with the sightline.
correct. Well, what the benefit now is without this hot box, I can add more than even on this exhibit A6. So that still shows the hot box here, but now that I know, or at least heading in the direction I can put it in the building, the backflow preventer, I can add more landscaping to even this exhibit A6.
I see. And within the lot, part of the reason you're not at 100% covered is you're keeping a vegetated buffer, preserving what you, I don't know if you're preserving the existing, but you're adding vegetation back around.
I'm in a new landscape back around the property in the form of shade trees, ornamental trees, and shrubs.
Thank you. The parking ratio, that, testified to that on the plan.
I will. I mean, there was significant testimony by Mr. Taylor at the last meeting in justifying why. Obviously, I have to come back and testify that as a plan.
Okay. And as far as the widths of the nearby buildings, I believe the Japanese restaurant is around 40 feet wide, facing the street, a little bit closer. And the nail salon is about 30 feet.
So, I'll say this, as part of my planning testimony, we've done a survey.
I'll look forward to
Yeah,
that.
up and down Burnt Mills Road, and I can give you from Colonial Acres going down everywhere.
I'll let you
Okay,
testify.
and there's
before
an
I-
exhibit that'll show that you can see the differences.
Okay, I'll defer those questions to our part. Maybe they'll answer them.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kennedy?
Anybody else from the public? Seeing no one, we'll close that.
Thank you. I'll call our architect. Jim, come on up. Have Mr. Collins swear you, please.
And swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God. Please say your name and spell your last name and give us an address.
James Kassay, K-A-S-S-A-Y, 17710 Detroit Avenue, Detroit, Ohio, 44107.
Mr. Kidd, you're an architect, Mr. Kasai? And where are you licensed?
I'm licensed in Ohio and New York, and recently application was accepted, and I paid all the fees for my New Jersey license. I just can't practice until I get the actual stamp, which is coming in 12 to 14 weeks. But historically, all the work we've done in New Jersey has been licensed under one of our principals.
And you testified before in New Jersey?
I have,
Other states as well?
yes.
Okay. And you've done work, I'm sorry.
That's fine, Tom. The board will accept his qualifications as an
Terrific.
architect and fact witness as well.
Thank you. Why don't we mark your boards? I think we left off at A6, so we're up to A7. How many boards do you have, Jim?
I have 5.
5. So let's start with A7. Just, we'll mark them quickly, then we'll go through them in your testimony. So what is A7?
A7 is picture plan FE1.
So that's a floor plan?
Yes.
Okay. What's A8?
E8 is floor elevations.
Okay.
A9 is
Just mark them like this. It's A9 is another,
exterior rendering, 3D rendering.
okay.
A10 is playground equipment
Playground, okay.
photos. And A11 would be photos of an existing similar building.
Of another Primrose facility?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. All right, why don't we start then? I guess you want to go with the internal workings first?
Yeah.
With A7, so let's talk about that.
Okay. Matt Taylor had spoken briefly on it previously, but just to give you an idea that security is a concern with this school. So they basically have one point of entry at the vestibule, two-wheelers going into it, but it is secured access with a keypad that they change out if a parent leaves, then they can change the code. So there's restricted access to get into the building. But the parents park their cars, bring the children into the space. They have to sign in the lobby. There's a computer where they log their child in each time when they come and when they leave. And then the parents physically walk them to the classrooms and drop them off and then leave. The classrooms are arranged by age groups per state child care licensing. So the ratios are consistent with those regulations from infants up to an after-school or a preschool age program. And there are egress doors around the building, but everything aside from the vestibule is within the fenced-in area. So there's kind of these corral areas. So coming out of the classroom, the teacher can take the children to their appropriate playground, but it's all within a protected area where the children can't run off or there's not somebody outside waiting. There's 4-foot-high fence in front of the building, and then when it gets to the playground areas, it becomes a 6-foot fence so that we can reach over. And then in between, the playgrounds are all separated by age group as well. So those are separated with 4-foot fences in between so that they can keep each age group contained. They go on rotations throughout the day. They generally take them out once in the morning, once in the afternoon.
That's a fairly typical layout for a Primrose?
This is a very, very typical layout, so it's a tried and true prototypical design. There's kind of the core elements are in the center. There's a warming kitchen and resource and staff room, conference room to meet with parents, and a laundry room. The remainder of it is classrooms. All the classrooms have toilets within the classroom, so that the children don't have to leave the room. You can maintain supervision at all times.
Okay, let's go to what the building, what's going to look like. So if you go to A8,
We made some revisions based on Mr. Kenny's meeting with Historic Preservation. They had originally requested that we add some brick to the. Let me back up a little. When we started the design, there's multiple combinations of materials that we put on these buildings. And we're trying to be consistent with what's in the surrounding area. So looking at this area, there's some brick and predominantly a lot of lap siding. So our first proposal was to use a brick base with a brick entry feature, and then lap siding.
that clapboards, is that lap siding, clapboards?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the fiber cement brake plank.
It's not shingled though, it's a shiplap detail?
Right, yes, it's a 6-inch exposure. So we originally had just brick and siding, brick for the entire base, and then at the gable, Historic Preservation at the first meeting requested that we bring some of the brick from some of the features from this entry to the street side, and so we added the canopy and the brick, and also brought another cupola to the gable. When Mr. Kennedy went back the second time, they requested that we mix it up a little bit. They had looked at another Primrose in the area that had some stone on the base. They liked that. They wanted to break up this elevation a little bit instead of being all brick, bring some stone into it. So we put stone around the entire base of the building, and then just brick at the end gable and at the entrance.
And this shows the sign Mr. Kennedy referenced before, doesn't it? The so-called rosette, where is that?
The minor sign?
Well, the one on the building.
Sign. The building sign here. We do have a sign shown on the Burnt Mills gable.
It's a small circular sign.
Yeah, it's the same. That was part of bringing some of the features from the element, from the entrance element.
Okay, and this does show the ground sign as well. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, the ground sign, we reduced it so that the signage is the 8 square feet. And then it has a brick surround. For the remainder of it, we removed the logo from the top of the arch.
Is that brick match the brick on the building, or is it consistent?
It matches the brick on the building, yes.
Okay. Let's go to your next exhibit, please, which would be A9.
I have a question about the sign.
Sure.
Can you tell me what the height of the sign is, not the sign itself, but the height of the brick?
The brick, 4'8".
That's to the very top, the curved arch?
To the top of the arch,
Okay.
4'8"?
yes.
Okay. Go to A9, please.
This is just a perspective view. You know, the elevations don't account for grade. So this shows that there is a small retaining wall that will carry the stone through. The the fence sits on top of that retaining wall. But gives you a little more dynamic look of how that all ties together with the landscaping and materials.
But this doesn't show the enhanced landscaping Mr. Kennedy just talked about.
It does, and this is.
It's really more to show the building,
Yeah.
correct?
What exhibit is that?
That's a A9.
Thank you.
All right, and is this representative of grade from the street to the building?
Yes, it's roughly. It's not perfect, but this height compared to where you're standing, it's all, there's some,
That retaining wall is part of this?
yes.
And it is shown on the site plan too.
Yeah, I'm just making sure everything's in scale.
I think what's missing is the landscaping you saw before.
Yep.
So you get a better view of the building here than you will in the field.
The critical elevations are input in here, so this is the street level versus finished floor of the building and the height of the retaining wall. This grade line is consistent with.
Is all consistent.
Is the enhanced landscaping going to obscure
Yes,
that view?
yes. I
Yeah.
believe that's what they said.
It's gonna show
The landscaping that Mr. Kennedy was talking about at the beginning of the presentation today will obscure this view from Park Mills Road.
Correct. That was the idea.
It'll be tall,
Ron,
treeless as well as...
could you, Ron, there's questions about the landscaping in the front. Yeah, this elevation doesn't show your landscaping, so the question is, where will that landscaping be, how tall will it be, and how will it obscure this view?
The two elements here from this perspective is the landscaping would be heavy on the left side of the sheet, okay, mostly to block out the view this way coming over 287 or back towards 206. On this side, the heavy landscaping is on the other side of the driveway, again, getting it now. We have more landscaping up in the front here, that's left. The goal is not to go hide the building, but to go obscure some of that wall, bring that scale down, and you see a heavier landscaping here, so.
Actually, we would still be able to build it.
Oh, yeah. The
Right, so
goal from the road fronting, right at this view, was not to try to hide the building.
Okay.
Okay, that wasn't the intent, and just make sure I get my exhibit right here. So, this curved shape is here, grass in the front, okay, trees along the front, okay, heavy foundation plantings, trees here, and then the wall is right here.
Well, there, I mean, two trees,
Right, trees here.
Yeah.
Okay, tree in the
Those-
front.
those will have some-
Those are high.
those will be high.
Yeah, they'll be planted at 3-inch calipers, they'll be 12 to 15 foot
Okay, so
tall.
eventually they could,
They're gonna get big. No,
And
I mean,
they'll
that's-
block
it's
it.
not to block, it'll diffuse it, it's not blocking. Okay, yeah, but it'll diffuse it. But up here, up here, on each side, trying to close it in, get evergreen, get tighter, that would be planted 6 to 8 foot high, and that will start closing in on each corner, so it's focused on the building rather than the longer access looking down. That's the intent of what we're trying to do. But here, yeah, I got, 4 trees in the front that are, they're shade trees, a little big. With time.
It looks like this has the sign, the original sign, correct, with the rounded top with the little rosette. That's not part of the sign that's proposed now.
And you wouldn't have the logo in the front of that gable either, right? The only other one is going to be on the
Over
side.
the entrance.
That was our original intent, but that's fine, it's just a louver.
So louver facing the street and the logo over the entry door.
Right. Logo here, no logo, louver.
Okay. Your next exhibit, A10, I believe, is the playground exhibit?
Yeah, just images of what's on the playground. You can get an idea of, this is all synthetic turf. Synthetic turf has come a long ways. It's not the stuff, the Astrodome from the mid-70s. It's made to look like grass. When you're up close, it's not. You walk on it, it's not grass, but it does have some length to it, and they come in mats, they roll it out, and there's small rubber fines that they sprinkle over it, and they rake it in, and it gets down just a give it a little bit of weight to hold it down, but it's extremely pervious material.
So the granular rubber is what gives it some posture, correct?
Yeah, it stands the.
So it's more like a field turf than it is an AstroTurf.
Yes,
Okay.
And it's green.
it's green.
All right, and there's no concern about the, because the rubber tends to be somewhat static.
Right.
So if these kids aren't going to have mud, they're going to have static rubber on their clothes and body.
Yeah, the rubber does, when they rake it in, it does work its way pretty far into there, so it's, it'll come off. We've never heard of, we've done tons of installations of this, and we have not heard of any issues with the rubber being tracked in, or kids picking it out of the grass. You can't see it, it works its way down into a kind of a netting mesh that holds the blades and just kind of firms it up down low. But you can get an idea that is synthetic turf there, the green. It looks pretty good. It doesn't look like it's not immediately apparently artificial.
It just shows different kinds of equipment that might be at this facility for different age groups.
Yeah, this is the typical. It's all age appropriate, so the younger children get stuff that's appropriate to their size, and then it moves up. There's canopies built into a lot of this for shade. And, there's they call it the primrose patch. It's they plant various vegetables and flowers.
I know that the state provides a certain latitude with child care facilities in more urban settings where they limit, you're allowed to get away with less play space. The fact that you've got 4 distinct play spaces for each age group, is that an operational criteria of Primrose, or is that required by the state law?
It's an operational preference. It's a selling point for parents that have a nice playground with an area for them to run around. Is obviously appealing. New Jersey is a pretty small requirement for. I think it's 150 square feet plus 75 square feet per child using the playground at any one time. So you just have to make sure there's enough. It might be 1,500 or 2,000 square feet, but you have to get all the classrooms through there. All children have to get out to the playground.
All right, so just in square footage, how much beyond is the operational standard versus whatever is code or the building standard in New Jersey?
The building code standard in New Jersey is not definitive. I couldn't give you a distinct number. You could probably make a pretty small number work. I don't know exactly what that number is. We'd have to figure out how many. For each classroom to get out there and 75 square feet per child each time. So you'd have to size it to the largest classroom. So if you had 24 children times 75 square feet, whatever that number is.
All right, so you know I'm going here, right? So one of the questions is coverage, right? So you're opting to go for more play space and more coverage when you're not necessarily required to have as much play space and as much coverage.
True, and part of the issue is when you combine playgrounds, you have to have age-appropriate equipment. So I could figure out that number. It is less than what we're showing, but I can't definitively say like that.
Yeah, at some point, I'd like to understand what that differential is.
Okay.
Did you have one? I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
Did you have one more exhibit?
When we went to the historic planning, or historic preservation, they just looked at another building. It was not this particular building, but they hadn't seen one with siding. The one that they were looking at had was different materials. But just to give you an idea of a build, this particular one has a greenish siding. We're proposing a tan, but gives you an idea of just the look. This one has stone coming up, but just give you an idea of what the building looks like in person. The elevations don't quite do it justice. It is The roof kind of recedes back a little bit. It's an attractive looking building.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Can you pass that one around, please?
This one?
Anyone else from the board? Nick?
That was
The
A11.
architect?
No.
And where is that one? I wanted to first ask you to put back the rendering of the building, you know, with the trees and stuff. Yeah. Now, by our definition in Bedminster, how tall is that building?
It is, it's 21'1" to the right of the main roof, and to the top of the, there's actually a rooster weather vane that's on the top there, so the top of the rooster is 30 feet.
And what's our height limit?
I believe it's 35.
Oh, so it's okay. And this is measured from the low spot on the street?
From the average grade along the street.
Average grade.
Average grade along the building.
Very good, thank you.
Anyone else on board? Are you familiar with the Branchburg Primrose?
Which one?
The Branchburg? Did you? You're not? Okay. I just wanted to make a comparison between the two so I visually see it, since I visited it, and I wanted to. It is similar in the length and the parking in the front, like, similar to this, only not, it's facing the street.
Did you look at it all?
No, just the outside, I just visited the outside. But if you're not familiar with it, I won't go any further. I'll open it up to the public. Mr. Haggerty?
Brian Haggerty, 30 Traffic again. This might be a planning question, but on the county application, page 3, the commercial retail office objective might be the appropriate for childcare as opposed to school or public. Confirm that. The question becomes, in the unfortunate event that this doesn't work out, I think there's something like a 3%, like 2 or 3 were the only failures. Would you see this, as an architect, would you see this building as being adaptable to office, professional office use?
Yeah, I think there's a possibility. I can't say that we've done that. It's not my necessarily my expertise, but we do a lot of adaptation of the various buildings, and it seems to be an appropriate size to be devised into various offices.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Seeing no one, we'll close that.
I'll call our traffic engineer, Betsy.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please state your name and address and spell your last name.
It was the Dolan, D-O-L-A-N, Dolan and Dean Consulting Engineers, 181 West High Street in Sunnyvale.
So the board recognizes and accepts Ms. Dolan's qualifications as a traffic consulting engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. So, Mr. Ola, why don't we just, your firm prepared the traffic report on file with the board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Maybe just a quick summary of that, and then Mr. Ferrero in his report asked us to comment on other uses that are allowed in this zone at a similar size to this building, and how you might compare the traffic generation rates from this facility versus other types of facilities that could be built here.
Sure. So I'll start with the traffic characteristics of the Primrose. You've heard testimony at the last hearing. There's no defined start and end times at Primrose. The parents are dropping off and picking up typically over a 2 to 3 hour period. Traffic engineers look at the peak hours. So what happens at Primrose during the peak hours, about 70 to 75 cars coming in for either pickup or drop off. So 70 to 75 cars come in and go out during the busiest hour in the morning, busiest hour in the evening. And based on our counts, that's 8 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 6 in the evening. That's when peak volumes are occurring through the intersection with 202, 206. And of course, in the morning, we've got that nice long approach to 202, 206 across the site frontage, and then not much happening in front of the site during the evening peak hour. So as we went through the analysis for the one driveway that will intersect Dark Mills, that amount of traffic combined with the existing traffic, we find an operational level of service C for the driveway, which means it's right in the middle of this level of service scale. It's an acceptable level, and that was acknowledged in the county review. Of course, during that busier morning peak hour, we may need some courtesy gaps for people who want to turn left to go back to the state highway. But certainly it's a great location for parents who work in Crossroads, because it's a great pickup drop-off, and then you're right in. So 150 is our rough number for the peak hour at Primrose. And as your engineer, Mr. Ferraro, had asked, was, well, what about other permitted uses? And so we looked at the building area, roughly 10,000 square feet and change, with smaller building elements, 5,000 as a maximum, or 1,200 for grocery and liquor stores. You can have a bank. A bank would do about 130 versus 150. We can have a busy, faster food type of use without a drive-through, that would do about 140. We can have a combination of two smaller restaurants that might do about 120 to 150. A few small stores, 95 to 125, adding a third one, 145. So one restaurant on its own would be comparable at 140, a bank on its own 130, or a combination of a few could get us anywhere between 100 to 200 trips in, again, those peak hours, depending upon what combination those uses would be, but between 2 or 3 smaller buildings or one high-intensity use and a smaller use, we'd be looking at anywhere from 100 to close to 200 peak hour trips, depending upon which exact uses there were. But a standalone bank on its own or a higher turnover restaurant on its own would be comparable at 130 to 140.
And you've seen the county report. I mean, you've heard the testimony before that essentially these are issues that we can deal with. Mr. Kennedy has touched on that. Anything further to add, or?
No, not really. The county report acknowledges our analysis, acknowledges the morning peak hour activity across the site frontage, and I believe we've addressed the trip generation comparison asked for by Mr. Ferrara.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Board, do you discuss the parking lot, or are you just talking about the traffic?
I can talk about the parking supply, but really the engineering of the parking lot is Mr. Kennedy.
I think I'm talking about the use of the parking lot with the amount of spaces that are in the parking lot for some of those other uses that we could have down in the village. You know, if this doesn't stay at child care center and it goes to all those things that you mentioned, there's only 40 some odd parking spaces.
Right, the analysis that I just went through, that peak hour trip generation for different permitted uses, really would not be, as someone just asked our architect, could you take this building and transform it into an office? The analysis that I performed is kind of a what if other uses were proposed here that are fully compliant. What would their trip generation characteristics be? I'm certainly not suggesting that we can transform this particular building into a combination of those uses, because depending upon what those uses are, we need a different type of parking layout or supply.
Can you talk for a minute about, you mentioned, I think the county categorized it as a C.
Yes.
Can you talk about the different A, B, C, or D?
Sure. And we summarized it in our report that at the level of service scale is how traffic engineers rate intersections or driveways. And it's like grades in school. A is at the top and F is at the bottom. When you have level of service A or B, there's little or no delay for a person to drive through or exiting a driveway. When you're down at E and F, you're experiencing longer delay, you're becoming frustrated, there's a need to adjust capacity. Level of service C and D for an unsignalized driveway is typical during peak hours. It's an acceptable, may not be acceptable grade in school, but it is acceptable for traffic engineering, particularly for driveways to single uses and busy roads.
Do you know what that intersection is currently rated without?
Oh, the
Primrose?
intersection?
Yeah.
The signalized intersection is at an F, yeah.
And adding the school is going to make it a,
Well,
F minus.
adding the school traffic doesn't change that. What is happening on the side is there's a need to retime and rephase that traffic signal. So that's something that's happening independent of this particular application that our office has been involved with. And we've requested a meeting with DOT and your township traffic engineer and the county traffic engineer to discuss retiming and rephasing, because based on analyses not performed in conjunction with Primrose, we've determined we can get it up to D for most of the movements if we retime the light.
Do you have any details as to how that light would be timed at all?
Right now, what's happening is northbound, southbound, lefts go, they shut down. Northbound and southbound through and rights go, they shut down. And then I think it's westbound goes by itself, eastbound goes by itself. So the idea is to allow the lefts to continue northbound and southbound while northbound and southbound are going, and provide the same type of treatment on eastbound and westbound. Give the lead left simultaneous, and then let the two go. That type of operation, by our calculations, will greatly improve the operation of the intersection and reduce that queuing on the eastbound approach in the morning.
Yeah, because I think another issue with that signal too that might be contributing to the issues there is the length of time that 202, 206 has a green, and you're sitting there for over 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And traffic will queue up, especially in the morning.
Exactly.
So, that might be something to think about as well, but then you have to convince the state to reduce that time.
Exactly. So there was a meeting I didn't attend, but our office met with the county and Mr. Olivo on behalf of the township. And that meeting was, I think, in late August, and we have since requested a meeting with DOT, formally submitted September 16th, I think. So that meeting is pending.
Okay.
And all interested parties will be at one table to discuss that.
The township has submitted what is called a problem statement to the DOT, identifying that signal as being a problem and needing retiming. So that's the first step to get the retiming.
and approximately how long does it take to get that answer? Okay, because I mean, this is.
I can tell you, I was just involved with one in Randolph, and it took 6 weeks.
No, that's actually quicker than I thought.
Okay.
Well, this came up once before with when the DOT property was going to be reused for other things. And the issue of that light was...
But there was never any problem statement, never any formal application the DOT made to address that.
Yeah, because I thought people said afterwards, well, even though that fell through, let's fix that light, and then nothing happened.
And nothing happened.
So we should blame the politicians for that.
We should blame the DOT. They're the most.
Oh, okay.
They're the biggest guy to blame.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
In your line of work, how do you figure when a traffic cop can help a situation?
That's usually, for something like a church, or regular schools where there's that defined arrival and departure pickup at the end of the day. Sometimes for an event type of thing, or like I would think places of assembly. So churches and schools come to mind. The police department would have to be involved because it would have to be a police officer that would stop traffic, for example, if we were looking to put someone at this particular location. Because a crossing guard, I don't think can do that.
I mean, have you ever recommended that a traffic policeman?
I can't say that I have.
Because I see them all the time. different
Every day
areas.
on Liberty Corner Road, there's a
I'm
traffic cop
just
there. They
curious.
stop traffic every day.
Can it help the flow?
Oh, well, certainly, because what would happen is instead of someone, for example, leaving the Primrose driveway in the morning and turning left, they have to wait basically for someone to let them into that
Right.
two-way center turn lane.
Right.
So if there was a police officer there, they could create
Boom.
gaps.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The other treatment we've used is those do not block the box at the driveways, because that also forces the drivers, it gives the drivers a cue, don't stop here because people need to get in and out of the driveway. That's what we've used in many applications where there's an excessive queuing problem.
I think that would happen here.
Until this traffic signal is returned.
Well, you know, who knows? It could still remain.
Good.
How far is the driveway from the intersection?
300 feet.
1,500?
No, not 1,500, a few hundred.
Few hundred,
Yeah.
okay.
Tom?
Paul, would we want this applicant to work with the township independent of KRE on that problem statement and the potential correction?
The problem statement's already been submitted.
But I guess what I'm saying is if this goes first, then would we want the condition of this application to be to help accomplish that timing correction and some of that work? Assume one goes without the other, and we want to expedite this one, for example.
I don't know.
Is it, in other words, is it just a timing thing, or is it a series of improvements to the?
It's a timing thing. It's just redoing the box that's next to the intersection.
There's no physical modifications necessary, just the timing?
Just timing.
There's not even the striping of left-hand turn lanes only, straight lanes only, any of that kind of?
No.
There are those at that intersection.
They're already marked
You know,
out.
all the lanes are there, it's just getting the.
Been there for a long time, too.
But no suggestion of changing it?
I thought that because the roads don't meet at 90 degrees, that was somehow an issue. Why?
Well, they talked about a rotary and some other things there that were dependent on that.
It may have been a perception at the time, but I can tell you that these things get changed all the time. And it's a timing thing, and it's just a legacy of the way the light always was.
Can you determine how many of the coming out of Primrose would be turning left in comparison to
We
the
did
total
model
number?
that, yes. In the morning, we had,
Is that your 6 or 7?
well, either 4 or 7 shows it. We show 52 turning left out and 18 turning right out, and that's based on the split that's recorded on eastbound and westbound Burnt Mills. There's more traffic, of course, going to the 202, 206 corridor in the morning versus coming away from it. So we followed that split with a higher orientation back to the state highway.
You know, I would agree with that, because I think there'd be more people using it from that direction, too. So they're going to be going back that way, you know.
So 4 is just the Primrose load?
Yeah, 4 is just the Primrose
And
traffic.
7 is the combination of both?
7 is everything, that's correct.
Okay, so, Ms. Sullivan, let's assume that you build this within next year, and you go first before anyone else in that area. What would it take to, and the DOT approves the problem statement correction, would your applicant be prepared to do that timing revision as part of your site plan approval?
Well, our office is involved with both projects, so we're the ones who have requested the meeting with DOT, and the town has already submitted the problem statement, so it's an active request to DOT. We're just waiting for the formal meeting with them, so we're advancing it regardless of which application is approved when.
But let's say that this gets approved first and starts to get built. Is it any kind of big problem if we say your approval is subject to you implementing that DOT correction? Or?
Well, we have no control over DOT implementing it, but we're certainly, we'll bring it to the table, yeah.
Well, the other way around, like you won't start until DOT does the retiming?
But essentially,
Won't be
I mean-
operational. Well,
I'm not sure we can live with that, Mr. Collins. You're saying we
I
cannot...
don't understand
Yeah.
I really don't understand enough about how hard this is. So it sounds easy to me, but things that sound easy to me are much harder for engineers, so.
Physically, it's very simple. Mentally, it's getting DOT.
Realistically.
Don't talk about that
That's really what it is.
I just want to be practical. I don't want to be saying, okay, we got to wait for another developer to do it. I want to know, I mean, if it's level of service F, and going to get worse than F, which is by the timing of the light will be, by what, 30, 40 more seconds to get through the light or something like that? So, I don't know, you must know. And if the problem can be cured by changing the computer program on the traffic signals, that sounds like it ought to be done tomorrow.
It ought to be, and we're bringing it to the table. So we can't make DOT change the timing though. If they, in their traffic engineering world, determine that there's a reason they don't want it changed, then that's completely out of our control. We'll give them the analyses we've done, we'll present them with the facts and the information, we've got drone footage to give them. So we'll give them all of that with the explanation of what's happening, but then it's up to NJDOT to implement the change.
Have you prepared the timing recommendations?
Yeah, yes, there's a whole analysis that's been completed. We haven't put together, I don't think, a timing directive, but all the analytical backup has been done to test the cycle length and the phasing to get enhanced levels of service and reduce queuing.
The only one question, I've been involved in these discussions too, is your consultant says there's a couple of things we don't know yet. Is that controller that's in there is old and likely has to be all ripped out. Okay? Also, it's likely the heads on each one of those lights would have to be changed. If they're changed to what your consultant's saying is the standard, all those posts have to be all thrown out and replaced. So the timing could be easy, but there's mechanical things that may need to be done at that intersection. Not new striping, not new curb lines, but with the physical structures of there, because that's an old light, that it's not, it may be simple in getting it done, but the physicalness of doing some of these things may be complicated. We don't know yet until we get to the DOT.
It's the actual programming of the device.
It's not in the program. It's likely that it can't be reprogrammed, literally that device, the box. got to be
Those are
taken
probably
out.
all relays in there.
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah, okay, I get it.
And I guess, okay.
We'll get the punch cards out next.
Mr. Levy, your consultant says that's an older machine.
Okay.
So it's likely that whole thing would have to be replaced, the controller. And it's likely that all the posts, the masts.
So it's
and
a
the head-
significant investment on the part of NJDOT or Town of Bedminster or Somerset County.
Well, everyone says it would be the town of Bedminster.
And I assume it's entirely NJDOT's purview, right?
And the county was involved with this at this meeting, and they said, we'll help, contribute to, not money, but the solution.
God forbid.
They're not going to wait their pocket either.
Put in the 2 cents.
Yeah, that's all they'll put in.
Yeah.
So again, if it was just timing and the flip could be switched tomorrow, you could say something, but we don't know yet, but it may be complicated, that may extend this thing. It's just an unknown.
Any idea how old the traffic control is at that intersection? I mean, just as a curiosity. Gotta be
80s maybe.
gotta be older.
It was the fourth or fifth phase of the Hills was put in when that thing was put in.
So that's gotta be mid-80s, late 80s.
I have a question. It appears to me, and this is just my opinion, that when you go west of that project, there's just mostly farms and open land, and when you go to the east or north side, whatever, that's where all the traffic is and all the people are coming from in the workplaces and the office buildings and so forth. So even though you have this calculation that says 52 turns left, 18 turns to the right, I think it might be more like 65 turns and 8 turns or something like that. That's just my opinion, but let me just finish for a second. So at what point, if you can't fix the light, do you decide no left turn out of this no left turn sign out of this driveway?
We're going to be forced to make a U-turn.
Because we have children coming out of this driveway at rush hour.
Right. Well, I think the evening period is a lot easier than the morning period. I would say that would probably be the county's jurisdiction to prohibit any turning movements. What does that mean? Well, maybe people are going to take Pluckerman Way around, through the office park to come back out.
The speed bump road?
The speed bump
Well,
road, yeah.
and don't forget, you can't make a left out of there either.
No, I know.
Yeah. that's
So,
the problem.
but you're forcing
no
U-turns
sign
somewhere,
that
so
says
they're
no.
turning maybe around in the bank, or they're going to go somewhere where they can turn around, so you're forcing U-turns, but, again, that would be the county's, jurisdiction.
If the light does not get fixed, would you anticipate queuing going back from the intersection back to the school?
Well, in the morning it does already.
Already?
Yeah, it does.
Well, why don't you, I don't know. It's, you know, in a way, it's either you do it, or you, theoretically, if you didn't do it, it's an off-track improvement for which you pay a proportionate share, but you're here now asking for variances to have, 12,000 square feet, so it's really important that you deal with this with us now. I mean, I appreciate very much that your company, your traffic consulting firm is doing this work, so that's very helpful. That's like seed money to get this study, but it's a real problem. We ought to do something about it, and I think we need Primrose to step to the plate about this in some significant way.
Well, I talked to my client, but I mean, this is obviously a regional problem, not a Primrose problem. We can get in and out of our site safely. That's not an issue. The issue is the intersection down the
I
road.
don't know about that. If you're relying on courtesy to get out in a stacked lane to an F intersection, and you're making the F intersection F plus 30 seconds, and you're asking for variances to do this, it's a problem that should be solved. And you're saying it's solvable. I mean, it costs some money. I appreciate that, but
Well, if you're
that's
asking,
what we have to focus on.
Right, but if you're asking for a commitment, I can't give you a commitment, and that's
Well, I
something
want you
beyond
to-
the scope of this
I
project.
want you to go back with Primrose, and I want you to talk to Dolan and Dean, and I want you to come up with a plan. I mean, I don't know. It sounds like it's doable, it sounds like it ought to be done, and it sounds like it's not like it's
It sounds like...
unrelated. It's related, it's
Sure,
totally
but
related.
it's a problem-
It has a nexus, it's
Well-
like, this is the perfect example of, you should do something.
It's the perfect example of pro rata share is what it is.
Well,
This is-
but you're here now first, and no one else is at the table. And so that always comes to my mind as
Sure.
if there's a solution, solve it now. And if it's not too expensive, definitely solve it now. So if it's really expensive, pay a really expensive share now. But I'd rather have you fix it.
I guess the real question is, Mr. Collins, how long before we get an answer back from the committee this is in front of as to whether or not they'll address it? It's the DOT, I guess?
Well, a meeting has to occur with DOT to talk about the feasibility and, as Mr. Kennedy said, the extent of the improvement. But just to put something into better perspective, we're not adding enough traffic to make this the F plus. Yes, it's an F, but the magnitude of the additional delay is a few seconds at most. So this is a regional issue. It's an existing condition. From my perspective, the amount of traffic that would be generated by Primrose or any development on this site, the improvement would be far in excess of one property development responsibility. This is a pretty big improvement. Maybe the timing can happen quickly. We just don't know the magnitude of any domino effect.
Only you know better, but my understanding is that if what Ron says is true, then we need new stanchions and new arms and new devices at 2 or 3 of those 4 corners. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
No, you're talking hundreds.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
4 to 500.
Yeah.
Because those aluminum stanchions with the arms are an arm and a leg, and the devices themselves are an arm and a leg. And there's only one supplier in the entire country, and all that good stuff.
And how much is a traffic cop? Per hour? No, I'm serious.
Well, that's a good point.
It's a good point. I think you make a good point there. I'm concerned about how much a traffic cop really is going to help this. Are we going to make it from an F to a D?
George, you mean a traffic cop at the intersection or at their
Well,
drive-through?
I mean, I don't know. It's just that I see them in Hudson County all the time. I see them around here, and they really get the cars moving.
Mhm.
So, going on
I know those physical.
Unless you're on Church Street, Liberty Corner, when school's letting out.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This one is a pretty big intersection.
Yeah,
for a-
it's
for a
pretty hard
traffic
to-
officer. I thought you meant at the.
What, that would be great too for an hour. Boom,
The
boom, in
traffic's
and
gonna
out.
come
They
from
do
more
here
than
at
an
the
hour.
at the grammar school.
Well, but
in
it's
the
a
morning.
peak, she says
That's
8
what
to
I'm
9
saying,
is the
with
peak time.
Peak arrival and then the peak and dismissal,
They're
right.
right here at the grammar school every morning.
So I think the Primrose is a little different animal, but I would say from, basically that 7 to 8 or that concentrated morning peak period, that's the period where turning out left would be most difficult. Otherwise, I think, left in is no big deal, right in and out is no big deal. PM is not as much of a problem. It's just that one period in the morning when the queue does outreach and sometimes pass the site.
I mean, I hear what Tom is saying, but, they're incrementally adding less than, we did a quick calculation, they're adding less than 10% to that, to intersection now,
Or much less than
not
that.
those numbers.
It's probably.
So, for adding that 10%, here's a bill for $250,000. A little crazy.
Actually, it's less than 3%, is that your?
Less than 3%, yeah.
Could Primrose themselves provide the security for the traffic rather than our police, or is that something that's
They could
feasible?
pay the special
Security?
police price, yeah. I think it's better to get the money towards this improvement. So, and I'm not, I don't really look at it as just 3%. I look at it as this way, and I appreciate that this is always debated. This is a variance to have this building with these cars and this use, which is a pretty heavy generator of traffic. You could deny the variance, and you would have less traffic. So they need this variance, and it's appropriate when you need a variance to have not a fully conforming site plan, but a variance case to focus in on an off-track improvement on obviously affected intersection. Now, DOT technically does their own work, but they could help assist that happening. So I'm saying to the applicant and to the board, I think this is the chance to get something towards that improvement. And just the fact that they're engineering it as a part of this company, the traffic consulting firm is engineering it, is a contribution, but that's being paid by somebody else. So Primrose could do something here as well. And maybe it isn't as bad as $500,000. Maybe there's some way to use new computers and new switching to use the existing facility. I don't think we know that yet. So people solve problems all the time. But this is a problem that ought to be solved. I mean, you're all saying it. It's a terrible intersection. This is extra traffic. And you don't always just look at it as 3%. You look at it as there's a problem now, and it's going to make it worse. So this is a significant part of the additional problem.
No, I would take exception to that. It really is not a significant part. And the testimony is permitted uses here are going to have relatively the same traffic. That's what Ms. Dolan just walked through. If it's a restaurant, if it's a bank, the numbers are relatively similar. We need a variance for this use. We've talked about that in terms of FAR, but the traffic numbers are roughly the same.
So-
So if we go away and you put a bank there or a restaurant there, the numbers are roughly the same.
So I want to go back to that for a second. You did a whole bunch of conforming uses.
Right.
Those use numbers were based on conforming size buildings and parking facilities for those uses?
Right.
Or they were based on, retail in this 12,000 square foot building?
They're based on the 5,000 square foot or 1,200 square foot max as contained in the ordinance.
Okay.
And the FAR that allows just an excess of 10,000 square feet on the property,
Theoretically, if we put a restaurant there,
or two, or a restaurant and a bank, right?
we would have the same traffic as, and we would never see that application.
Well, the site plan application.
We'd see site plan, but not
You wouldn't,
for variance.
you wouldn't have an FAR issue,
Right.
no likelihood. You'd have just,
They wouldn't be looking for a variance. if-
yeah. So that's why it's unfair to say that we're a significant contributor to what otherwise would be here. That's my view of that. And to saddle us with this obligation, frankly, is unfair, as I see it. The traffic cop may be an issue that we could talk with the client about that may help us get in and out for a limited time in the morning. But I think that's our view of the world.
Kent County has reviewed the calculations and the driveway operations, and they haven't required any, I think there's a question on turning prohibitions or any particular treatments, and that is a county road.
Personally, I see a concern of the queuing and then the few parking spaces that people are going to get in the parking lot and not be able to get out because they're not going to be able to make the left. You know, so I mean, you got people, the parking spaces could get filled up, and where are the cars going to actually be able to turn around back there?
I didn't testify much on parking, but I have some in my report. We've done a lot of parking studies for Primrose and other child care centers. We've got 47 spaces, I believe, proposed here. Based on what we've counted and analyzed at a lot of existing New Jersey sites, 35 is the magic number for this size enrollment, which is 190 kids.
Okay.
So I'm not expecting this lot to be fully occupied. I would think that if the employees ended up parking here, that would probably be the best thing, because the preferred spots for pickup drop-off are going to be, in front of the building. So if anything, those 6 spaces closest to the driveway intersection might be employee, but there's certainly enough room for people to maneuver throughout here. And again, with 47 spaces, I don't see a situation where they're going to be full.
Okay.
And also, too, the employee population starts out quiet and it sort of peaks into the middle of the day and then starts to drop off again. So when you have your peak employee parking demand, is not during those concentrated pickup drop-off hours. So this is a pretty comfortable parking supply based on.
Okay, so the cars wouldn't get stuck in
No,
there?
they're not,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
This is a very comfortable supply for this
Okay.
use.
But I tell you what was, if the first car, they can't make a left turn for 5 minutes. Cars keep coming in, there's going to be a backup in the parking
Yeah,
lot.
if somebody's waiting 5 minutes, they're gonna turn right and do something else. But more than likely, what happens is, as that queue moves to get through the light, then it slows down, and as people slow down, they're not getting up against the car in front of them, they're slowing down because they see that the light is red and the queue's developing, and that's when
People
you
can
turn
slip
left
in,
out.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I don't imagine any situation where they're gonna be waiting that long, because if they do wait that long, they're gonna turn right and then go elsewhere.
Question for Tom. Tom, could we ask in the resolution as a condition that they work diligently with the traffic study team and the state, and if that falls through and we perceive a problem, I'm not sure who would determine that was a problem, that they would also need to put a police officer there between peak hours? Is that something that's doable to make it work, to compromise, or?
Yes. Be better if they agreed to it, but they have a problem. I think you're going to want a developer's agreement in this application, and you're going to want to say things like this, and also that they'll contribute their proportionate share. I'm going to say I believe the proportionate share is bigger than Mr. Melman believes the proportionate share is going to be. But that's what you work out in the developer's agreement.
That's what I was going to ask you, Tom, if you had a number.
This is the kind of thing,
percentage,
this is the kind of thing that needs a developer's agreement, and it needs an off-track improvement contribution to the township to help make this happen. If you do it here, you have one other site that it might happen on.
Can you make the approval contingent upon the intersection improvements?
Probably not, but you could make it upon contribution of a fair share towards it. And there are a couple different ways to do that, and there's one that's done by DOT that's a little bit more, more money than.
And how could we employ a trigger like George was suggesting? Could there be a
In a
trigger?
developer's agreement, in a developer's agreement with the township committee, it could say that if needed, the applicant would pay for the special police to do traffic patrol at the intersection.
Or at the driveway, you mean, or?
At the driveway,
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I don't think anybody could stand in the middle of 206, even with the brightest orange on,
Well, let's open it up to the public now, and,
I'm sorry, I have one more
oh,
question.
go right ahead.
This
No,
question is
go
for
ahead.
Paul. Paul, if the Department of Transportation was to repair that whole light system there, do they pay for it 100%, or do they go back to the county, the town, or either a developer to ask for money into it, or it doesn't work that way?
Well, there's generally a policy in place now that the DOT has, that if the problem statement is generated by the municipality, which in this case it has, they have a 70-30 cost share,
Okay,
where the DOT pays 70% and everybody else pays 30%.
okay.
And everybody else is Bedminster.
No, everybody else is everybody else.
So who would
County.
everybody else be in this
You've got a
scenario?
county road, you've got Bedminster Township, you've got developers.
Okay.
We have Bridgewater kicking in for the thing that they're building down the road?
Not
Not likely. Fat freaking chance.
30% from others. Right.
Well, Pluckerman's in Bridgewater, isn't it?
No.
No.
So everybody tells me.
Thank you.
Wow.
Okay, we'll open it up now to the public. Yes.
Brian Hagerty, Bedminster again. Can you revisit, please, your presentation on the other uses? And I heard you say 5,000 square foot building, I thought you said 10,000 square feet FAR.
I'd say it's 10,000 and change allowable, and 5,000 square foot building max, and for certain uses, it's 1,200 square foot area maximum.
So, can you clarify how you get 10,000 square feet of use and 5,000 square foot building? Are you proposing?
It would be more than one building.
I see.
Yes. I said that one standalone bank or high volume restaurant would do 120 to 130 trips. Or if you combine one of those uses with a second restaurant or a small store, you, again, depending on the combination of uses, could generate anywhere from 100 to 200 peak hour trips.
And such mixed uses would be permissible in the end zone?
Yes.
I believe what I call the end zone uses, in terms of professionals, the mixed use line refers to mixed uses of the above, and restaurant is actually below. So we said the restaurant would be standalone?
Yes, standalone.
So paragraph E, some paragraph F, I believe.
I don't know, I don't have
You
this.
have the slide coming back up, so we can already
Right.
press that back.
But as I had said, if you had a high volume restaurant, I had 140. Lower volume, 50 to 70 for the different categories of restaurant. A bank, 130, or drink. Your ordinance limits the liquor and grocery store to 1,200 square feet, so those would only be 20. But other varieties of retail could be 45, 80, 15. So it would be a combination. An office doesn't get you much, 15, 20 trips.
You're saying offices?
Offices, general office would be 15, medical 20.
Okay, so that'll be substantially less,
That would be less, yes.
as opposed to the retails. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to follow up, just so I'm understanding. You're saying peak hours 8 to 9 a.m.?
That's what we recorded for our.
So how many people are going to the bank at 8 a.m.?
Oh, right, no, we have morning peak hour trips and evening peak hour trips, oh, and weekend peak hour trips also. So depending upon the uses, the numbers I was citing was the PM peak hour, because that would be common to all.
Well, let's talk about the morning peak
Okay.
hours.
Let me just grab my sheet. So in the morning peak hour, a comparable permitted use, the morning peak hour of the bank, if it's 8 to 9, had 100 trips. Depending upon the nature of the restaurant, 126 trips. All other uses.
From 8 to
especially
9
retail,
in the
would be
morning.
less. Yeah, in the morning peak hour. But they would have Saturday, which Primrose doesn't have.
Yeah, there's no peak hour on Saturdays.
Well,
Well,
yeah.
the traffic isn't an issue on Saturday at that intersection.
Right, but when we perform an analysis of Saturday, it's usually we count 11 to 2, we isolate the busiest hours. So there is a recognition of a peak hour or generation on Saturday for some of these permitted uses, but Primrose isn't generating anything on Saturdays or Sundays.
Right, but I think we're concerned about the weekdays, 8 to
Okay.
9.
Anyone else? Okay, I think
Okay.
we're,
I was recall Mr. Kennedy.
yeah.
And Mr. Kennedy is now speaking as a professional planner. Now, why don't you maybe run through the variances first, Ron, kind of a high level, and then we'll talk about the justifications for each of those.
I'm sorry, I'm just noticing something about figure 4
This is a track?
for the traffic.
Oh, okay.
If I look at figure 4, morning peak that we were just discussing, you're showing enter 78 and exit 52. Right, and there's 20 left-hand turns into the property and 58 right-hand turns into the property. And then you show exit as 52, but only the left-hand exit is 52. There's another 18 right-hand exits.
Yeah, I saw that when we were talking about that. Right under the Primrose logo, it says enter 78, exit 52. That 52 is a typo because on page 5, we have a table that summarizes the entering and exiting traffic.
So the 52 is the right number, but that 52 left-hand turn is not correct.
No. That 52 under the Primrose logo should be a 70.
Oh, it should be 70.
That
plus
should be 70.
18.
It's a total of 52 and the 18.
Okay.
And that correlates then with table 1.
So then when I go to 7 and I get the aggregate, it's correct there?
Yes.
All right. Sorry. Not usually my thing to pick out.
I know, it's a typo on the figure.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
The first variance that we're talking about is the D variance that brings us as a board adjustment case. And that's purely based on the floor area ratio. It has nothing to do with the 5,000 square foot in the zone. It's a C variance, that's separate. This is just the FAR variance. So under your rules of 13405.4, the FAR in the zone is 0.17. We're at 0.198. In real numbers, that we're proposing 12,215 square foot of building. The zoning ordinance for this size lot, 1.49 acres, is 10,479. So the delta is 1,700 square foot. That's what we're talking about. So obviously, that with this lot, with this size lot, we can build 10,479 square foot, and we're proposing more than that of 1,736 square foot. So that's the first variance to D. Everything else we're talking about is C variance. The next one, the C variance, is the lot coverage. And again, the zone, the BN zone, is 40%. And with counting the lot coverage for those other elements in the rear that we talked about, play areas, we're up to 72.2%. Okay, of that for those areas. The next variance is a C variance that no building in the BN zone shall exceed 5,000 square foot. Again, delta here, 5,000 square foot versus the 12,215 proposed. The next one is your minimum off-street parking standard for this use. Based on your criteria, it's a count of 70 stalls would be required. We're proposing 47, and your testimony on that, I will do that. The next one that we put in the original application was from section 13.5.5.82, and it had to do with setbacks for school. We determined at the first hearing that we're not a school or daycare center, so that goes away. We do not need that. Next one was signs. There's two elements to the signs. The first one would be under one sign per site, and that rosette that we're talking about on the building is a sign. So we'd be getting deviation from one sign to two signs. The two signs would be the standalone freestanding sign at the road and the other one on the building. The second item of the sign variance that we sought was the exceeding the 8 square foot max. And now we said earlier part of tonight that we would comply with the 8 square foot. The other sign on Rosette is 9.6 square foot, so that would be a slight deviation from that, 9.6. But the freestanding sign would be allowed. That's it on the deviations.
All right, so why don't you go through the proofs on those, Mr.
So
Kennedy?
if we go through the D component, and again, this is what's called a D4 variance. So it's still a form of a use variance, but it's not a pure D1 use variance. The use is allowed. So it's not an issue of whether you can or cannot do a daycare center on this property. It's the issue of the density or the square footage. So in this case, it's an FAR variance, and according to the statutes of a D4 standard, the primary focus of the variance, is whether the site will accommodate the problems associated with that additional floor area. So that's again the criteria is, can the site accommodate the problems associated with the difference in the floor area? So in this case, we're talking about a difference of 1,700 square foot. So if we look at the testimony that's been given already, is we heard from Primrose, this is the prototype to work in this environment, in this part of New Jersey and even the Northeast, that their standard size that they have for their business model. So to say that I need to get it down to 10,400 square foot structure, they say, I'm just not building, that's fine, I'll just go onto some other property and do it somewhere else. But it's not going to be in this town, and it's not going to be on this thing, because that's their model, okay, as far as what they're doing. So it's not like an office building that I can take a couple thousand square foot off and still make it all work. You also heard that the size itself doesn't matter on the size of the property. So even if we had a 6-acre piece of land, they'd still be proposing a 12,215 square foot building. So it's not dependent on the size of the land. That's their model, that's how they're doing it. And you'll hear later, they'd still propose 47 spaces if they had a much bigger lot to deal with. That the square footage, that the additional square footage that's here, if we remove that from the site, it would be a difference in lot coverage, no doubt, that would be less. But it wouldn't change any of the features of the streetscape. It would be in the rear, wouldn't change that. Wouldn't change really the population of the students if they were going to do that. It wouldn't change the population significantly at all, the future population or the student count population. So impact is really not there. So as the standards stated, is can it accommodate the problems associated with the site by having that bigger square footage? And again, visual impact would be the same, be no different at all. The traffic impact, again, the same. If you had a little less square footage, maybe it's slightly less, but again, we're talking about 1,700 square foot. It could safely accommodate, as you've heard in the testimony, the site as being proposed. Some of the things that are specific to the BN zone, and certainly in this area in Bedminster, there's not a site this large in the BN zone. Anything else in the zone, except for the church, everything else is on quarter-acre or smaller lots. And you can see that going up and down both from Mills Road as well as the 202-206 corridor. There's only one child care center right now in Bedminster Township. And as was testified by Mr. Taylor, there's a need. And it's a need, it's a local need. It's not because of the offices, it's not because of the other uses, it's because of the community that's here right now, and they feel that's a need. So what we're tying this all back to is the purposes of zoning to grant the relief. So under the statute, for the purposes of zoning, is trying to promote in section E, the establishment of appropriate density populations and concentrations that will continue to the well-being of persons, neighborhoods, communities, regions, and preservation of the environment. As well as section G, to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, industrial uses, and open space, both public and private, in accordance with the respective environmental requirements, in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. So as Mr. Taylor talked about, he's been looking for years in the Bedminster market for a site. Hasn't found it. And so the need's been there for quite some time. And when I first talked to him about this property, I'd say about 9 months, a year ago, he finally found a piece of property large enough to meet the need. Okay? And if not, there's nothing else in that village neighborhood, whether it's the Buckingham Village or the Bedminster Village, that would accommodate this type of use. The only other use that you have of a daycare is in I'll say the hills, I guess it's the PUD still that zone, I'm not sure if the whole hills have got rezoned, but originally there was a PUD zone. There's no other zoning or a site that he found suitable for this type of use with his model in your commercial zones or your building neighborhood zones. So it doesn't exist. So it goes back to, if not here, where? And what we're asking for is we have an oversized lot for the zone compared to the rest of the lots in the neighborhood, in the village neighborhood zone. And we're asking for a deviation of approximately 736 square foot over the allowable.
1,700.
1,736 square foot. And as I stated, I feel the site can still accommodate that additional square footage, the 1,700 additional square footage, as was heard by me and others that have testified on this. As far as the impact of the zone plan, we did things like rotate the building to lessen the impact to the streetscape, that we minimize parking where appropriate, and even have a little more parking than you heard testimony from the traffic consultants as well as the developer, that it can meet their standards for what they have. There's no uses, no residential uses that are in that neighborhood, so I don't see an impact associated with that. There's not residents around. So I feel that the additional FAR that's being requested can be accommodated on this property without having a significant problem to the zone plan or to the compliance. The next item is C, variance for the lot coverage. As you heard in the various testimony components, the building is a model, 47 square foot, or 47 parking spaces is the need for the building size in this location in Bedminster, New Jersey. We have proposed what the developer or the operator has said is the appropriateness for the turf as well as the mold or rubber material there, and that gets us to a 72.2% lot coverage. If the lot was smaller or larger, it still would be the same design. We wouldn't change anything. So if we had a lot that was 2 acres, 3 acres, it still would be the same design in that sense. So it's not like we can go and shrink something and still make it more accommodating for that. We're mitigating any of the issues associated with impervious coverage by the stormwater management. So having this increase in lot coverage, we're still accommodating all those components that would be associated with lot coverage, including stormwater management. We tie right into the county stormwater system. We're not affecting other neighborhoods, other residential developments that are in the area. Discharges into their system and eventually into the Chambers Road. The layout itself is efficient. The parking layout, the building layout, so there's not an area that I can optimize by restructuring something for the layout to make it efficient to reduce the lot coverage that would be on the property. Again, to meet the 12,215 square foot building with the 47 parking spaces. We're desiring it to have the physical use near the population densities that are the residential densities in Bedminster Township, and obviously near that intersection in Pluckman of 206 and Berkman's Road. So I believe we can grant that relief and not have an impact to your zone plan, not have an impact to the neighborhood, and not change the characteristics of that neighborhood from a lot coverage standpoint, that we're over-developing that piece of property. I think it'll fit within that neighborhood as it's designed right now. As far as the BN zone exceeding the 5,000 square foot requirement, the judgment of that is one of scale of the building as it relates to the streetscape. We talked before that this property is oversized, it's 1.49 acres. The zone allows for half-acre lots, so almost 3 times the zone. I couldn't divide it into 3, but I can divide it into at least 2 and 2.5, size there. So I could come back to this board with a conforming application of 2 separate lots The required lot width is 90 feet. This lot is, I think it's 210 feet. So I can come back with two conforming lots and put two 5,000 square foot buildings on this property right now. And it would conform, I think fine, it would conform to the bulk standards associated with this. So the delta is not 5 versus 12.5 or 12.2. The delta is between two buildings that could be each 5,000 square foot versus what we're showing as 12,000 square foot. As a comparative element, I want to refer to one of the previous exhibits.
Have we marked it already, Ron?
We have A1. Just as a comparison, we looked at the neighborhood plan and just looked at lots and the width of the buildings. And I could just take Burnt Mills Road, and I'll just go along that. The Burger King is a 40-foot width building. We're proposing 55-foot along the frontage of this building for the daycare center. Kiku's 46 feet. The nail salon is 36 feet. Annie's Deli, sat back a little farther, but 60 feet. And then Colonial Liquors is 75 foot. If we turn up the road on 202-206 and start heading towards the Bedminster Village, we're talking about smaller lots that are vacant right now, 4 of them. But I think they were approved either commercial, the first 2 were commercial and the next 2 were residential. And they're smaller houses that are 40, 30, 30, and 32 foot wide. They're there. And then you get to the Bergdorf building, which is 50 foot wide, and then you got the church, which is much bigger in volume there. So if I look at those numbers and add those up, we're in the average for that frontage that's along the road. Okay, we're not the biggest, but we're in the average along that frontage. And again, that was by design. We changed the architecture from the original concepts were that Primrose had as a prototype, and we altered that to accommodate the site and accommodate the intent of the requirement of not having too big of a structure. We rotated at 90 degrees. We still had it relatively close to the road. It's only 40-foot setback. That's an intent of your zone, is to bring things closer. We put the parking to the side as opposed to putting it in front of the building back farther, like Annie's Deli. That's not your intent. You said you don't like that. You want those buildings closer to the road. So we're trying with this building being still 12,000 square foot, not 5,000, still meet the intent of the character of what you're trying to accomplish. We added landscaping in the exhibit I showed today, A6, and tried to close down that view to the building. So we're looking at the frontage of the building and not down the longer axis of the building. That's the intent of adding that landscape. So with the additional square footage that we're asking for relief, we're trying to minimize those impacts by the design, by the architecture, by limiting the frontage to only 55 foot wide, and by adding that landscaping. And we feel that we can meet at least an intent, clearly not a number, but we can meet an intent of your design by trying to minimize impacts by having a 12,000 square foot requirement in that 5,000 square foot zone. Again, if I chopped off half the building in the rear on the proposal, and I kept the building still in the front, I'm going to say it's a similar impact to what's being proposed in this exhibit. If I cut the back off and just had this front piece, as I'm driving down Burnt Mills Road, it would have a similar impact than what's shown on the plans right now. The next item was off-street parking. Again, 70 is required by your standards that you have not changed in 32 years. Okay, so it's a standard that some would say is older, it sits out there. But some comparison, I think someone asked about what happens if it's another use. And I just did some quick numbers just while that question was being asked. With the building of, with the parking of 47 parking stalls, if we used a space count of 1 space for every 250 square foot, which is generally for an office use or a general business use, that's 11,750 square foot, and we're 12,215. So we're within 500 square foot of being allowed. We wouldn't need any deviation from that other than that 500 square foot. You have a quirky, it's a 1 per 225. Is that correct, Paul? I think in your ordinance now? Yeah, I think it's on office, but not something else. But anyway,
It depends on the types of office.
Yeah, that would be 10,500, so we'll go down a little, but still, we're not talking about dropping a lot. So the point of that is that even if it was another use, and we're talking about a restaurant use that would be there, but another type of use there that would be converted into an office itself, we're pretty close to meeting that criteria. We're not there, but we're pretty close to meeting that criteria. Obviously, next door with Kiko, it looks like it has 3 parking spaces, and you got a pretty busy restaurant there that we've all been there, and we've all backed out of that driveway, right onto Burnt Mills Road when we've gone there on a Friday and Saturday night. But, I'm not saying that's gonna happen in this, we have turnaround areas for it, but you have uses in your village that have peak uses that don't have enough parking. I think we have plenty of parking here for this use, and if it becomes another use, they come back to your board, we're getting a variance here. So it's not like they can just go and file for a building permit, they're coming back to see. But I would say, if we went to a general office structure, we're pretty close to meeting the criteria, based on this criteria. The sign, again, we're talking about really 2 signs, but one is truly a monument marker on the road, trying to show the access or the location of it. The other one is pure decorative. If the board says that, I really don't like that second sign, get rid of it. It's a feature of the architecture. They're adding it in there. As I said in my previous testimony, if it went away, that rosette would still be there. It just wouldn't have the logo on it. So that we think is a choice. We think it's better, but it's certainly a choice. And then likewise with square footage, it's filling that size, which is 9.6 square foot as opposed to 8 square foot. We can make it a little smaller, but the rosette fits the size, that spatial relationship of the dormer that's there that you saw with your architecture. So it's a slight deviation from that. So that's it on these reliefs that we're asking for.
Terrific. Any questions from the board?
Yeah. Chambers Brook, you said it discharges to Chambers. Show me a...
Where?
Yeah. What? You're saying it goes to the EDC or whatever?
No, Chambers Brook.
What discharge? Oh, you're talking the stormwater? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
That was with the lot coverage.
Anyone else from the board?
No, I'm just curious as where it picks up.
So I can tell you quickly. So it comes down along here, goes down what is the back driveway.
Gotcha.
There.
Yep,
And then
yeah.
it goes underneath 287-78.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Ian?
Ron, we talked last time, I don't think we had actual numbers, but we talked a little bit about the lot coverage of the neighboring properties. Do we have numbers? Do you have numbers for those?
I can say that we didn't go and add up all these, but as you can just observe of all the ones towards that intersection, I'll say the lot coverage that's impervious coverage, as far as building or hard pavement, if you get up, the nail salon, Kiko's, the nail salon, Annie's, Colonial Liquors, these other ones, it's 80-90% lot coverage. Burger King, we did that, and we were about 55-60% lot coverage. Okay, that was a while ago in there. And then when we start getting either across the street or up back to these office buildings, I don't think it's a good comparison.
Yep.
They're probably heavier, but they were big 3-story office, or 3-story office
It's a different
buildings.
thing.
They were a different animal in there. The church itself, they have the whole gravel lot that's in the back here, and they got some front areas, but we didn't go and add that up. It's a big parking lot, but we didn't go add that up. But clearly towards this intersection, except this one building here that probably is never coming for a development in the parking lot in the back, everything else is pretty intense, equal to or greater than what's being proposed here.
Okay. But the existence of a problem doesn't
I'm not
justify the perpetuation of one.
I'm asking to answer the question. It's not the proof of
Okay.
what we were
So,
justifying.
I'm hung up on the lot coverage issue myself, because they acknowledge that their operational need is for more play space, and therefore more lot coverage. They can scale that back, seems to me, very easily, without impacting their operations significantly. And we're not looking at this 70% number, we're looking at maybe something a little bit closer to the 52 that was originally suggested. So again, there's no one demanding that they have that much play space, there's no legal requirement, there's no ordinance that requires it, there's no Jersey, whoever has jurisdiction over daycare centers, no one else is requiring. Again, it's an operational thing that they can easily reduce, in my view. So on the lot coverage, I have an issue. I can get past some of the other things that you're talking about, and I think you make some good points, but I'm not there on the lot coverage.
Yeah, I have two comments on lot coverage, because that's, make the whole thing grass, okay? You just, and I'm not saying to just go to extremes, make it all grass, and guess what, that's how I grew up in a playground. And it was a lot, okay? We live in a different world today, but just that was it. But the notion here is the buyer of this service that lives in your community has options. And if they found it's not acceptable to a standard that they feel comfortable to the market standard, then they're just gonna go other places. Okay, you're not gonna have something successful here. It's gonna fulfill someone's thing, what happens in the next use? Well, you're gonna have an office building, you're gonna have another use there that's not gonna be this. So I'm responding to how I hear the group that runs these Primroses, how they look at this, is they're meeting the market need. Would they love to just dump the mulch in all those areas? Well, mulch is a lot cheaper than some of these other things that are shown on there. So from an economic standpoint, it's less construction costs to go put mulch or some other material, or take some of that and put grass out in those areas, a lot less money. That's a built structure, these other things, and it costs more money. And they're doing it because it's meeting the needs of what the parents are bringing their kids to here. Not making it less for them to operate, not making it, I'd say, more economically advanced than, but making sure people come and use that facility. As Matt Taylor talked about last time, he's been looking in this market for a while. He thinks it's a severely underserved market right now. And they're trying to be on the high end of the marketplace for these things. So they're trying to service that need. And this is what they've expressed, is their need for these elements that are there. So it's not based on something that they make more profit, that they're trying to cheat on something, to spend less money to build something, it costs more. But it's really trying to meet the demands of their clients, which is the parents of the kids that are going to go in. That's why they're doing it. That's why they're spending that money in doing it the right way. And based on your definition, not necessarily other municipalities' definitions, based on your definition of lot coverage that counts a lot of things that most ordinances don't count, we're caught in that we need to address that as 72.2% requirement as opposed to something significantly lower than that. So we can do that, but it's just not something that they're going to find not desirable for them, but their clients that come here that have options and that definitely say that, I'm not going to do it. And that's why I think that's important to them. That's why they ask to do that.
So you're suggesting that although the initial installation cost is higher, it's not a function of the ongoing maintenance of the natural turf that has to be cut, seeded, management, those kinds of things, to make sure that it's green and it doesn't become mud and those kinds of things. Mud would be a negative, but you make sure that it's grass all the time too.
Parents get worried about it. It's grass. Okay, I got to water it. Okay, not good for the environment in the world we live in today. I got to put fertilizers on it. Again,
it could be natural fertilizer.
It could be, but again, these are things that people get concerned about in today's world of what's going on a clay grass surface than what we grew up in. The door was open, we were thrown out to play. Okay, it's a different world that they're living in. That's how we're responding to care centers. Okay, when we grow up, they didn't exist, or certainly not to the extent that these exist today. So it's responding to the marketplace as opposed to the desire from an economic standpoint that they're trying to do, and that's what's causing that we be born by. So it really is. And again, it goes back to, if you say, I feel so uncomfortable doing that, then they may choose, it's just, I'm not going to do this, that type of thing. Because if I can't get the number of people that are in here at the dollars being paid for that, it's just going to say, it's not going to work. It's a model that's been, I'll say proven, there's a lot of them out here, and there's a model that makes sense to work, and if there's too many things on it, the model's just gonna say, it's not gonna happen.
I mean, I agree with Rich to a point. Look, I would love to see all grass there. And have your, reduced down to the low 50s. But for me, if I was putting all my money into this franchise, I would come to the town here, and I would think if the board was inclined to, give a favorable outcome to the applicant, at that point, I looked at pictures online, a lot of pictures of Primrose and the material that they use, like you described, not the cheap AstroTurf. I mean, there comes a point where, the owner has to have some leeway, I think. Even though it is pushing, I mean, I get it. But
Excuse me, and I don't know if this is
No,
the
no,
right time
this
for us
is-
to have
this is
dialogue,
good.
but it's not just, you can do it with grass, right? That's one way of kind
Absolutely.
of reducing the coverage. The other thing is they can have 3 distinct play lots instead of 4 distinct play lots.
Yeah, they could.
There's a couple different ways that they can reduce the coverage, not just with grass, but, they choose, these are all operational criteria that they have. And we already, as we started this dialogue last month, it's 12,000 square feet because that's their model. Other daycare centers are more in the 8,000 or 9,000 square feet. So it's 12,000 square feet because they deem 12,000 square feet critical. It's 4 play areas because they deem 4 play areas as critical. It's 72% because they deem to do turf instead of grass. These are all things that they've decided operationally. And I'm listening to what Ron is saying, that this is what makes Primrose Primrose. And Primrose is a nice model. I'm looking at some of the same things that you're looking at. It's a nice model, but it's all imposing density, coverage, all the things that we're talking about, and they could come to us with a solution that's a little bit more accommodating to me. But that's my thought.
Yeah, no, that's why we're here, to share our thoughts and try to come up with the best solution.
Ron, the owner here, has said that, they haven't been able to find a property in the village zone. Why is it so important to be in the village zone versus perhaps another zone?
Well, first
I
of
mean,
all-
they're coming to us for so many variances
Yeah.
anyway, so.
The minute you start getting to your residential zones, you don't allow it.
What about the
Okay,
office?
so that's a
Well-
building use variance.
What the office
Okay.
zones?
What's that?
The office zones.
Yeah, there's not one out there that has not been, maximum.
They're all too big, too.
And candidly, most of those office buildings that were all built in the 80s and early 90s, you want to rezone all those properties and reduce the FAR and lot coverage on every one of those lots. So they all are non-conforming right now.
Right.
So anything we would do to come back into there, we need FAR variances and lot coverage variances on any one of those traditional office buildings that have been built in the Bedminster Village or in the Plucking Village.
And
We
not
could do that,
very-
but we'd be back having that similar conversation that we'd be
Right.
over in FAR and over in lot coverage. So if you look at any of those office uses, so behind you on Plucking Way, across on Bed 1, any of these other ones, they're all at or above those criteria already.
I was gonna add in those buildings are not kid-friendly.
No, they're not.
An office building is not a
No,
kid-friendly
but if
environment.
there was a place in the parking lot that you go and take out some of the parking spaces that may be overparked, I don't know that. That's a solution that we come back to. You see that a lot in retail places now, where they're going in the front corners of them, and they're gonna go put another restaurant pad or something else that they're doing in a lot of redevelopment projects right now. So that would be another thing that could be in front for a daycare. But again, for most of your, not most, your office zones, your heavy office zones, your OR, OP zones, they're all built out. And I'm gonna say for the most part, all in excess, because you, back in maybe the early 90s, you went and reduced all those FARs and all those lot coverage.
Anyone else on the board? We'll open it up to the public.
Brian Henry, Desert Street, and thank you for addressing the widths and so forth. The question I asked earlier, assessor can answer. You did say that the use is permitted.
It is.
13405.1 is permitted uses. I'm not sure which one is the use you're proposing.
It's not on
It's not on. Okay, so is it somewhere else is it generally permitted?
it. It is. So it is statute and state criteria that says in your non-residential zones that have a daycare center is an allowable use.
In a non-residential zone.
Well, I say, and it could be not just an exclusive, it's a commercial, and even a mixed zone that has commercial and non-residential, it's an allowable use.
That is the interpretation. A is attached dwelling units, I always thought it was.
No, Mr. Haggerty, it is a permitted use by statute. In the municipal land use law, daycare is allowed.
That overrules. Okay, thank you.
We couldn't do it on Long.
All townships have been preempted by the municipal land use law about daycare. Okay.
And that was what was.
He stated that previously.
And that was one of the early things about the daycare, not a school and so forth. It was.
That's one of the things, although that's the ordinance talks about schools and has a setback. They are daycare regulated by the different agency than the Department of Education.
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else? We'll close it, Joe.
We have nothing further, or happy to answer any more questions that you have. It's unfortunate our client couldn't be here, getting stuck in Boston. I think Mr. Kennedy did a good job kind of answering, I think, what he would have said. And you're right, it's their design, but I think it's tried and true. They like the design, it works, and they do it because they think it would function well in this market.
Tom, how do you want to
So if
proceed
you're-
with this?
So why don't you try a motion and then you decide whether to add or subtract from it, or if it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You need a 5-member vote, 5 of 7 affirmative vote because it's a D variance, D4 as described by Mr. Kennedy.
I was going to suggest that maybe we let the applicant have an opportunity to work with the DOT a little longer before we
Well,
take a vote, or?
Here's what I'm satisfied that, you know, their explanation of what they're willing to do is interesting. My opinion is that you should condition it upon a developer's agreement with the township committee on this subject. The township committee would decide what to put in the developer's agreement. They hold the purse. They decide how much money of the township budget to spend on improvements, off-track improvements. And they would perhaps negotiate a off-track improvement contribution towards the likely 30% that others shall pay for this allegedly $500,000, potentially $500,000, but 3% of $500,000 is a lot of money. I think it might be more than 3%, but we don't negotiate that here. The township committee does, and Mr. Livo will help the township committee and Paul about that. And then if one of the conditions continued to say that if it doesn't work out with the light, and if there's a need for a special policeman at their driveway to have safe ingress and egress, that the township committee, that they will pay the special policeman costs for peak hours for safe exit and entrance. It helps them. People pay for special police that help them all the time, so I think that's something to fight about. If they really object to it, they can sue. I'm not worried about that either. So that's just one little aspect. The big picture is, are you satisfied with the basic variances in site plan, and what conditions do you want? But we would put the normal conditions like Paul and Frank's reports and anything else the board wanted to add.
I'll open up to the board, and if anyone has anything that they would specifically like to say about conditions or...
I mean, was Chuck going to come at all and help us here? Or
Well, that's one of the...
Could have Chuck come, yeah.
It was one of the things I thought, if the applicant were to see what they could do with DOT and maybe have Chuck come in. Maybe he can suggest some things. I know he's working with the traffic expert.
So you want to continue it to another night?
I'll leave it up to the board.
I think it needs to be continued to another night so we can really solve some of this issue before, to give the applicant an opportunity to present the traffic issue a little more clearly, rather than a negative vote.
Yeah, my concern is about the traffic, and my studies of queuing theory say that as your offered demand approaches capacity, delay goes up very quickly. So even if you're adding just a small number of new cars, the delay could theoretically get quite long. So I'm obviously not here to go through those calculations, but maybe if we had another meeting with the traffic consultant, we could explore those kinds of things too.
Anything further, George?
Yeah, I think that, I agree.
Okay. Yeah?
Jeff, you have anything?
No, I mean, I agree with that too. I think the traffic is the biggest thing.
My comment would be that I think whenever there are services that are in need of in the community, and I think daycare services are probably in need, that they should have a little bit leeway in the way they present their building and their project. I'm fine with the site plan because there's no residents around them at all. It's a busy, wide open street for the most part, and I think they've made some accommodations in terms of hiding it. So I do think that the lot coverage and all those other issues for me are fine, but the traffic thing, if one or two children get hurt in a car accident turning left at that driveway, it's going to come back and say, well, how did anyone approve this? So I think a delay in getting a little bit more focus on the traffic is a good idea for myself.
I have a real problem saddling, well, two things. My issues are the lot coverage issue, that they're electing to unnecessarily burden, in my view, whether it's additional grass or whether it's reducing the number of play areas that, again, is their own standard. And their model is more of a premium daycare provider, fine, but they don't necessarily need to do that. But going back to the traffic, I really feel like that intersection fails today, it will fail tomorrow under various different uses, and to saddle them with a portion of the obligation to fix that intersection is an undue burden on the part of the applicant. I'm fine with the special police that may be necessary at some point or another, or some kind of traffic cop at some point. I think that's probably a great idea, but depending on what the cost of this improvement at the intersection could be, even 10% of $500,000 is a lot of money. 10% of the 30% that would be the municipality's responsibility, or the so-called others that Paul was kind of describing. Maybe 10% of that 30% is a reasonable number to attach to this application, but, to ask them to come in and fix, historical problems at that intersection is just unreasonable in my view.
Short of a developer's agreement, is there a way to protect against sort of what we're all envisioning as the worst case scenario with traffic?
Well, I think that's what we need to know and take it further to see what other options,
Well,
see what
there
the
is,
cost might
but
be.
they don't want to pay for that.
Well, see what the cost might be, and go down the road a little
But
further.
the point that the chair is making is Chuck Olivo is the township's traffic engineering
Right.
consultant, who's familiar with the actual study that Dolan and Dean did, and with what DOT is saying about it. So his advice will
My
help
question
you.
is not whether or not the study is correct or appropriate. My question is, if we approve the plan as it is now, because their claim is that the traffic impact is maybe not de minimis, but not hugely impactful on that intersection, which everybody agrees is a train wreck. If in fact that turns out once it gets built and you know, enrollment goes up to the 180 or 190 students, traffic is, you can't get out of their parking lot, or the queuing is, you know, out of control, do we have some mechanism to fix it without a developer's agreement?
No, this is the time to start the condition that studies the issue, that perhaps results in a contribution towards an off-track improvement, which, by the way, is totally lawful under the municipal land use law and under standard operating procedures. The real debate is how much. Not whether you can, it's how much. And that's where the township committee decides that issue, not you.
And so once we recommend a developer's agreement, we have no control over the process.
We have no control, but the committee does, and the committee might say 0, or it might say this percent of this 30%, or it might say you do this work. One of the best ways to do off-track contributions is to provide your type of work that you can provide to the township in kind, meaning physical or engineering. And so it is a way to just capitalize a burden. And it is, you know, it's not just the township's burden, it's not just DOT's burden, there is a nexus between some additional impact on this intersection and this traffic. And the fact that there's a variance, in my view, makes that even more of a nexus. And but I don't think that'll be unfair. I think it'll be totally fair. Township committee is very fair.
But when we're talking about the township committee creating this agreement,
All the time. Basically, they do, there's a standard form developers agreement. We've used it in the past. You haven't had it too often, but it's typically used for subdivisions and things with public improvements on the property. It's also used with public improvements off track. And Mr. Malman's familiar with him. He knows how to negotiate them for his client. I'm familiar with him. John Blarga's familiar with him. You haven't had too many because there haven't been too many new subdivisions in the past 10 years, maybe 15 years. And you're not the only town. That's throughout northern New Jersey. There are very few subdivisions because of the economic collapse of northern New Jersey. So the reality is, it's not unusual. And it's all normal. And the other factor is we actually have this known problem that is reasonably close in its off-track nature, and surprisingly we have a known solution apparently, and that's unusual to have a known solution. So, and is actually something that you can quantify, which is so amazing.
Is it something that we can quantify, or we
Well,
don't know
apparently we
what
heard a range
the
of up
cost
to
of this is?
$500,000.
I don't think we know.
I'm not
But-
surprised by that, but I say to you that that's a good thing, to have a known, quantifiable, identifiable off-track improvement that actually can solve a problem. And the DOT might actually do it, even if it takes 5 years, if there's a pot of money that the township gets that covers even in this case 3% of that 30%, or maybe it's 10% of that 30%, and maybe KRE contributes the other, I'm not saying the full amount, you actually might see this improvement take place, which is an amazing thing in New Jersey. But it sounds doable, right? Sounds like engineers know there's a solution here. So whenever you hear that, I recommend grab it, because if you don't grab it now, you do not get it.
are we talking about only the 30%?
Yes.
Part of the 30%? We're not talking
Township
about the
committee will
100%.
decide that in conjunction. You're not going to decide that at all. Off-track improvements are negotiated by an ordinance of the township, with the township committee authorized to have a developer's agreement, and the township determining what is the pro rata share of this developer towards the off-track improvement. It's authorized in municipal land use law in section, I think, 42. It's what is it, Tom?
It's 42, sorry.
42. It's regularly used, it is a predictable and identifiable and describable thing, and you can't go beyond what it allows. People do it all the time, they're gonna work it out.
If I could just make one comment on that, and just as a way of being careful as doing this. And I'm saying this because I'm going through this in Randolph, exact same scenario. If the developer requests an improvement, the developer pays 100% of the improvement. The municipality requests the improvement as part of a problem statement. The DOT has that 70-30 policy. So it needs, in my mind, to be a cooperative effort, and it needs to be very clear.
Well, Chuck, I understand, is involved in it, which would represent the township, isn't that correct?
I'm sorry?
Chuck is involved,
Oh, yes.
so that would represent the township.
Like I said, he's already submitted that problem.
Right, so.
We're partially down the road anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I'll kind of give my thoughts, and we can certainly adjourn and have Mr. Olivo come and talk to you, but my sense is what Mr. Collins has laid out really is where we're going to end up. That the board can require a developer's agreement, which would then be negotiated with the township committee, which would then deal with the whole pro rata share issue. This board would not get involved with that. Are we 3%, 8%, 12%? What the number is, that's going to be the township committee. They could also impose a requirement if they want that we have a traffic cop in the event that there's some problem that's demonstrated at the site. So we can adjourn and have Mr. Olivo come back, but I'm not sure we're going to get to a different place. He may come and talk more about what's going on with the county and where the application sits, but that may go on for, weeks or months, or who knows how long it will go. In terms of moving the application, I think you have the facts tonight to vote on this thing, and condition the way Mr. Collins has suggested you condition it, without having to come back and talk more with Mr. Olivo. But it's your discretion to do that, but I think you have enough tonight to act on this.
I have no problem with that, but it's really your problem. What are you comfortable with as a board?
But how's the board feel? Do you want to come back? Or you want to?
I vote, I'm okay to vote.
Okay.
So let's
All
try a
right.
motion and see if you get a motion and a second and a...
Can we get a
You want
straw?
to poll yourself?
Yeah, I'd prefer, a poll would be nice.
Who is actually eligible? Who is actually the voting, of the people here, is it 9? Who are eligible, who are
I
the
think it's
voting?
only-
Rich and Anna are the alternates.
Yeah, Rich and
Rich and Anna are the alternates, everyone else is voting.
Yeah.
So it's convenient and customary, if you want to give us a polling of whether you'd be inclined to approve it with conditions or not.
And recall, we do need 5 affirmative votes for the FAR
I
variance.
understand.
The others are just majority.
No, I think the developer's agreement would satisfy me, because my biggest concern is the traffic issue. So that's something that
Okay.
agree directly.
Kathy?
I feel the same way. I was most concerned about the traffic. That was I was not concerned about lot coverage. I was concerned about the traffic. But if we're
I
going
was
to
also
solve that.
concerned about the look of the whole project from the road, but the renderings really made that very clear as to what it would probably look like from the road, and we're getting the small side of it on the road, so I was comfortable with that. Traffic is the issue.
Yep.
I'm okay with the developer's agreement, and if you could put a traffic cop there as a fallback or temporary fix, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Lou on that, the traffic cop and their agreement, so.
George?
You got 5?
He's counting. You're that alternate person. We know you, George. He's counting.
GR, make a statement.
No, you don't have to.
Look, I think, I said before, I mean, I haven't changed my mind. I appreciate what you said, Mr. Melman, I get it, but I'd like to hear from my traffic engineer. I think it's a good project. I think there's a lot of questions. I don't think it needs to be rushed, and I don't mean to, I wish the guy hadn't missed a plane in Boston. I just think to neaten it up and to tidy it up, I'd like to hear from the traffic engineer, and I would like to come back. But that's just me.
Okay.
Well, can we do this next Thursday? If this is quick.
Well, we have a big application
know,
next
but
week,
if-
and I don't think that maybe we would be prepared to do it next week. I think we'd have to wait a month.
I mean,
think,
if Chuck
yeah.
came and said,
Yeah.
yeah, this is, I agree with this or that, it might not take very long.
I wouldn't do it next week.
No, I
I would do it
wouldn't.
next month, 1 month from,
Yeah.
well, a different night than the other
Yeah,
controversial.
I agree.
But
Well, I guess
but it
we-
sounds like you have 5, actually.
I think
so-
we do, so I would say let's hear what we are voting on.
Okay, so it's a motion to approve the variances and preliminary and final site plan for Primrose as described this evening and the prior meeting with the conditions of their representations in the record, the standard conditions, Paul and Frank's reports, the revisions testified to by Mr. Kennedy, the condition that they'll enter into a developers agreement with the Township Committee of the Township of Bedminster regarding developers agreement subjects, including but not limited to potential off-track improvement contribution for the intersection of Burn Mills Road and 202-206, and for costs of special police to help at the driveway intersection of this property with Burn Mills Road if the township determines that special police are needed. And I don't believe, they will not have an above-ground box, hot box or whatever it's called. They'll do it as described by Mr. Kennedy, and if there's a problem doing that underground for the meters and into the building for the backflow preventer, they will have to return to the board for any relief needed to do that, because it might be a front yard variance. I think that's it.
Should you include any of these comments from the Somerset County?
They're subject to all the requirements of the county, if they, that's our standard condition.
Okay, without you saying?
Yeah, without us.
It's just standard.
We don't get to redo them, that they're just subject to them, so.
Very good.
And historical.
And Historic
Historical
Preservation
Commission.
Commission and that.
Yeah, we agreed to give them samples of the materials before construction.
All right, I guess we're ready for a
No,
vote.
I have a question for the attorney.
Uh-huh.
Tom, if someone were to abstain, how does that affect?
If an abstention would mean that your vote didn't count, but it would mean that it was not, it would not be counted as a no, but to carry a D variance, 5 affirmative votes by.
But I mean, would that preclude me from participating anymore? Is it like a no?
It only precludes you from participating in the resolution, not future applications that are amendments. But the resolution will be written for like a month from now. If you vote abstain or no, you do not participate, you do not get to vote on the resolution, you can talk about it, but you don't get to vote on it. And the only people who vote yes on a motion get to actually vote on the memorializing resolution if we do it we usually do the memorializing.
Thank you.
So you have, I think, you have a motion in front of you, we need a motion. and a
So
second.
moved.
Second.
Okay, we're ready.
Mr. Zeppic?
That would be me. Aye.
I'm Mr. Struggle.
It's Struggle, it's down here.
Well, Mr. Stradford?
Yes.
Ms. Christie? Yes. Mr. Adelis?
Abstain.
I guess.
Should be Mr. Leonard?
Leonard, yeah, aye.
Mr. DiGiovanni?
Aye.
Can I ask you again, Mr. Zeppic?
Still aye.
Gotcha. Chairwoman Betcha.
Yes, I think the use is a good one for Bedminster, and I don't want to see the business compromised, so with the conditions, I vote yes.
Good. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you. Good luck.
Good luck.
Thanks.
I think it's great for the town.
Anything else I need to?
Do you have anything else?
No, No, we do have some, wait, we do. Paul has some issues we have to, some administrative things we gotta do.
And, Madam Chairman, maybe we can grab Mr. Malman before he walks out the door.
Yeah,
Under our pending applications, we've had this Bedminster 2 funding
Yes.
for 4 years.
Yes.
Mr. Britt, I suggest that it be dismissed without prejudice.
I second it.
It's been hanging for 4 years. It's got,
Yes,
We'll be back at some point, but I
Got a
can't tell
beard.
you when.
okay, very good, thank you.
and then the pending application we have is for the cancer support community. And that's another one that I'm doing for completeness.
Okay,
I hope to have those reviewed for completeness, that one in Hamilton Farms by next week. So then we can talk about scheduling.
good, okay, very good.
Sign me up.
Okay, do we have a motion?
George, motion to second.
We'll second on that.
All in favor?
Just a good thing it wasn't the Yankee game tonight.
He's missing his call.
I'm missing.
This wasn't the Yankee game tonight.
Oh, excuses.
I think what you want to do is one.
Got to wear your